All right. So we now have quorum. The YouTube feed is live. So I'll just ask that someone please move and second a nomination for the position of chair. Councillor Chahal. Just
I'd like to nominate Peter Stroud as chair of this committee.
Would someone like to second that? Councillor Bohm and Councillor Stroud, would you be willing to accept that nomination?
I do. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other nominations for the position of chair to come forward at this time? Seeing none, I'll close the nomination period and I'll call the question. All those in favor that Councillor Stroud be elected as chair? Opposed? And that carries. And I will pass the chair to Councillor Stroud to conduct the election of the.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do we have any nominations for the position of vice chair? Councillor Bohm.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Kiley, and I did not discuss this with him before.
Councillor Kiley, yes, Councillor Kiley, do you accept the nomination? Yes. Councillor Kiley was vice chair last year. Okay, so we need a seconder for the nomination. Councillor McLaren. All right, we'll call the question on, are there any other for vice chair? Seeing none, we'll call the question on the election of the vice chair. Councillor Kiley, all those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Congratulations. Yes, just to remind the vice chair, if on the event that there is a committee meeting that of this committee where I am at work until 7, you may be called into service to run the meeting for the first hour. Yeah. Okay, so, but not tonight. Tonight I'm free. I am at home. I'd just like to let everyone know I've got 3 children and they may wander into the screen. They've been told to try to keep it down, which is why I'm wearing my headset so the noise doesn't spill over too bad. We also have a guinea pig that might squeak. I'm sure we're all kind of in that with our home office situation. Also, I'd like to remind the committee where we are and what's on the agenda. So this is the regular meeting of the committee. We did have a special meeting a couple weeks ago. And the item that was on that special meeting is on the agenda today, but it resumes because we lost quorum at that meeting, it resumes in the middle of that item when that item comes up. So you'll see the regular agenda structure, but on the business items, and there's multiple business items, this is a regular meeting, when the one that comes up that is the short-term rental licensing program, there's actually more than one business item that deals with that. We will go right back to where we were in the deliberations at the time that we lost quorum. In other words, that item, we're in the middle of that item. So when that item comes up on this agenda, we resume exactly at the point where we lost quorum. And we'll remind you where that is when we get to that point. So that being said, we have the usual agenda set up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? With the subheadings. And what we need is a mover and a seconder to get that agenda on the floor, and then we can discuss it. Moved by Councillor McLaren. Who wants to second it? Yeah, Councillor Chappelle. So the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'll just note.
Yeah. Yes,
I'll just note the two addendums that were circulated, one tonight and one last Friday.
Right. So if you're wondering where the addendums are and you're a member of the public, they're both posted on the webpage you would normally access this committee. There is an addendum, which is the report about the rules for the procedures of council and the what we call bylaw 1. There's that report. And that is one of the business items. So it's a report that speaks to that business item. That's one of the addendums. And the other addendum is a correspondence, 3 items of correspondence from members of citizens of Kingston, A, B, and C. And they are, you can read those letters by clicking on that amendment on the webpage for administrative policies. There's a letter from Mr. Don Rogers, a letter from Mr. Andrew, and a letter from Mr. Hartling. And those 3 letters are all in that same package. So we need to approve the agenda eventually. There are 2 addenda to add, those 2 that I just mentioned. Are there any other changes or omissions or proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none. So there's 3 items of business and the, going back to the 2 items, the 2 addenda, A and B, and there's the rest of the, there's the normal item from Rideau Crest Home. There's the multiple subheadings about short-term rental licensing, and then there's the item about, which was on the addendum, about the procedural bylaw, which has also come to our committee. So, any discussion? Okay, so then we need to approve the agenda. All those in favor? And thank you, Councillor Bohm. And that carries, thank you. So now we're at the confirmation of minutes. So we have the minutes from our regular meeting 2 months ago on October 8th. And we have the minutes from our special meeting on November 25th. We will move them both as one motion to approve both sets of minutes. Is there anyone here that was at both meetings that would like to move those 2 sets of minutes? Councillor McLaren, second by Councillor Chappelle. Any errors or omissions to either of those sets of minutes? Okay, the minutes, I just mentioned, the minutes of the special meeting are relevant to today's meeting because that was the meeting where one of the items was cut off for lack of quorum. All of that is in that set of minutes from November 25th, including the submissions from the public, the delegations, and the speakers list from that day. It's all in those minutes. So, any other discussion on the minutes? We will call the question to approve, to receive those 2 sets of minutes. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest from members of the committee. Councillor Cotty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I, Robert Kyler, the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in terms of business item B, C, and D, short-term rental, as I have immediate family who operates a short-term rental. And Mr. Chair, just for your benefit, I will obviously log off from the meeting, but I will come back for the addendum items. So I won't be here for my conflict, but I'll be available later in the evening for future discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Kylie. So the item A is first on the agenda. That's Rideau Crest Home. After Rideau Crest Home, yes, you would log off, and maybe the clerk could send you a message near the end of the items B, C, and D so that you'll know when to log back on. And we'll probably pause the meeting at that point to give you a chance to get back on. Okay, so that's clear. Any other disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Delegations, Mr. Clerk. Madam Clerk, I guess.
Mr. Chair, there are no delegations.
No delegations. Briefings, any briefings?
No, there are not.
Okay, so then we go to the business item 8A, Rideau Crest Home Board of Management. We need a mover and a seconder to resolve into the board. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, second by Councillor Bohm. That AP committee resolve into the Board of Management for Rideau Crest Home. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. We are now the Board of Management. We see the administrator is here to speak to us. There is a report included in the package. She will introduce the report and speak to us now, and then we will go to questions. Go ahead, Ms. Keys.
Great, thank you. Good evening. This is the 4th report that is provided to the Rideau Crest Board of Management for 2020. This report contains information from September through to the end of October. Rideau Crest had 5 incidents and no complaints reportable to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care for this time period. The ministry was in the home October 19th to the 23rd, and again on October 26th to the 27th. During the course of this inspection, the 2 compliance officers reviewed 6 critical incidents and 1 complaint, as well as they followed up on a previously issued compliance order. The final report for this inspection was received October 30th. As a result, the home was placed back in compliance for the order previously issued in August, and there were no further findings of non-compliance. As of October, there was 485 people on the waiting list for the home. 279 of those are actively seeking and or requiring admission to long-term care. 75 are currently in crisis awaiting placement. The home is currently in the process of finalizing a 2-year contract extension with Corporation of Extendicare on management services. And the report number was attached there for you to view. The contract extension provides a decrease in service levels as well as a decrease in the monthly fee from $12,000 per month down to $7,500. In regards to COVID, Rideau Crest continues to work very closely with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, our local health integration network, and our local public health unit to ensure the safety and security of residents and staff related to the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the home has not reported any positive cases of COVID-19 in staff or residents. All visitation except essential caregivers was placed on hold in November due to a respiratory outbreak. The outbreak was declared over in November, however, the home has continued with these visitation restrictions. The home did also place on hold short stay absences for residents outside of urgent medical appointments. The home has taken this cautious approach in an effort to keep the residents safe as we continue to see increased positive cases throughout our community. Management continues to communicate closely with all staff and families to ensure they are aware of all provincial directives, home directives, as well as plans and preparation in the event of declaring an outbreak. The home is currently in the process of finalizing a COVID-19 staffing response plan in the event we are required to declare an outbreak and find ourselves in a staffing shortage. This plan offers strategies for redeployment of departmental employees, City of Kingston employees, and volunteers within our community. As of October, the home had received $305,000 in emergency COVID-19 provincial funding. This funding supports cost of supplies, screening costs, and other incremental pandemic expenses. Since this report was created, we have also received confirmation of further funding for both the months of November and December. The Premier announced a wage increase of $3 per hour for eligible personal support workers across the province. This is to be effective from October 1st, 2020 through till the end of March 2021. The province did provide an implementation plan and policy to homes just last week in regards to this funding, and the city is currently working on this initiative. The approved 2020 operational budget for Rideau Crest Home is $5.8 million in municipal contribution. As of the end of October 2020, Rideau Crest had spent 83%, excluding commitments, of this municipal contribution, which is $35,000 under budget. This is inclusive of all pandemic-related funding streams as well. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Keys. I have a couple of questions, but maybe I'll let members of the committee go first, or members of the board go first. Any members of the board? Councillor Chappelle? Councillor Chappelle, you have the floor.
Oh, I'm just trying to get off mute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Keys, thank you very much for the presentation. It's always a pleasure to hear that our seniors are in good hands under your direction, and it's greatly appreciated. My question is really, look, going into the budgetary season of the next year, with the airborne particulate matter that's so prevalent and concerning, and the fact that institutions like the retirement residence is one that's got a closed air system, and because they're in such proximity, airborne diseases and pathogens can travel so quickly. Is there a plan to bring in any new technology to address air quality, to basically ionize the air or anything? Or is there any consideration of that being done? And is that something you would look to put forward in a budget if proposals would be brought forward towards you?
Thank you. There is, from the Ministry of Health perspective, there is a very big push right now for homes to look at their HVAC systems to ensure that air quality is good for homes. We're seeing across the province, there is a number of long-term care homes which are significantly old in terms of structure and don't have air conditioning and proper HVAC systems. So there is funding coming down from the province to address those areas. Rideau Crest currently, as we work with our facilities group here in the city, is very confident in our HVAC system. We have looked at the option, it's not currently required, but is there an option for negative pressure rooms? We see those in the hospital. At this point, Rideau Crest and long-term care is not going in that direction, but we are confident in our current HVAC system.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the board who wish to speak, ask questions? Go ahead, Councillor Kylie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. Thanks, Ms. Keys, for the presentation and the report. I was just wondering, it's a bit of a broad question, but at the beginning of all your briefings to us, you give us the number of people on the wait list and also the number of people, I think the phrase is under crisis. And this time around it was 75 people. What happens with those folks who are in crisis but unable to access long-term care? Are they in hospital?
For the most part, those individuals are in hospital. They come from home care settings, and when there's no long-term care bed available, they do end up, unfortunately, in the hospital system, which does tend then to plug up beds for other acute care and chronic care issues that the hospital is attempting to deal with. So yes, most of those are within the hospital system.
Yeah, that seems especially salient now. It always was a problem, but thinking of 75 beds in our community that are with people that could be with you or with another long-term care, that was just good to confirm. And do you know, relative to our population size, is that about what we're seeing across the province? Roughly speaking, I know that you don't have that data in front of you now, but
yeah, I couldn't speak accurately to that at this point. I do know in my time being at this home that numbers on our list have not gone down. In fact, they've tended to trend up every year. And during what we're seeing right now with the current healthcare situation, there has been a bit of a spike, but there was approximately 400 people on our waiting list for Rideau Crest when I first started here 7 years ago, and that list is going up to, we're seeing close to 500 people now.
okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I think you were speaking, but we couldn't hear you.
Correct. I keep muting myself because it's supper time here. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Ms. Keys, I have a question about the budget, specifically what's in the paragraph there in the report. So it says that nursing is significantly overspent, 257,000 overspent, but then it says the overspend in expenses is supported by additional COVID-19 funding. Could you go into more detail on that? Like, is the province covering that entire budgetary shortfall, or what does this mean to city finances? Ms. Keys, we can't hear you. You need to unmute. It's the same thing.
My apologies. My apologies.
So start again.
Sorry. So we are seeing significant overages, not only in the nursing department, but in many of our departments in terms of wages. And we are receiving pandemic funding, which is covering that. So most of that would be related to the increase in wages, which we saw come down from the province earlier this year in terms of a per hour wage increase. That is all part of what we're seeing in terms of overages and wages, and that was 100% covered by the province for those pieces. Yes.
Okay. Yes, I also benefited at KGH of that little pay bonus, which was a nice gesture, I think, by the government. Of course, I would say from experience that our stress level actually increased much higher than the pay increase was in percentage, but it still was a nice gesture, and I'm sure your staff feels the same way. I'd also like to comment that the fact that you've had no cases of the virus at all in your long-term care home. Yet many other homes in Ontario are undergoing either outbreaks or bad stuff. That shouldn't be understated. That to me, that's a highlight of this report. This pandemic hits long-term care homes the hardest, and you managed to keep it out of yours. So you should be congratulated for that. I didn't want to jinx you, but very well done on that front. What would you say is the morale amongst staff? And here we are at, month 8 or 9 of the pandemic. Like, what would you say the morale is at Rideau Crest now that we've been dealing with this for almost a year?
I would say that we have a fantastic team here at Rideau Crest, and I think that is the reason why we haven't seen cases. Our staff have been very dedicated to the home throughout this entire pandemic, but it's been very tiring. It's been a lot of extra work. We've seen a number of departments running short-staffed due to isolation requirements, testing requirements. We're seeing staff out of the home for days at a time, which is leaving many of the floors short in terms of their 100% staffing complement, sorry. So I think people are getting tired, but there's now a bit of end in sight with the vaccine hopefully coming, especially to long-term care, hopefully in the new year. So there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel now, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to power through this very challenging year and come out the other side a bit of a stronger group. Really proud of the group that we have here at Rideau Crest.
That's nice to hear, and I do hope that when the vaccine does become available in Ontario, that the government sees fit to send some your way near the top of the list, even before the hospitals, if possible. I think the long-term care homes should come first, but we'll see how that goes. Good luck on that score and on the eventual vaccination of your staff and so on, and your residents. I guess that's it for my questions. I'll go back to the board if there's any other questions. Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Keys. Good luck with Christmas season, and we'll see you next time.
Great, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. So we go back to the agenda so that we don't lose our spot here. So it's an information report, so there's nothing to vote on.
Sorry, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, we just need to rise from.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. Thank you. So at the end, of course, we rise from the Board of Management of Rideau Crest. We need a mover and seconder for that. So moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. We're back to being members of the Administrative Policies Committee. The next item, I'll go back to the agenda. So we're now at 8B. You'll see that 8B, C, and D are all related. I've already spoken to this at the agenda section. I guess this is a good time to just remind members of the committee and members of the public that we do have rules of order and we have rules of decorum with all of our city processes. Public meetings are subject to rules of order, and some of that needs maybe to be stated explicitly at this point. So there have been, mostly in the written communication, accusations and allegations of wrongdoing by members of the public about city staff, and this is not helpful to us here at committee because these are things that put us in a tough spot. We work with city staff, and without evidence, allegations about personal bias and things like that are really unhelpful. My own reaction to those kinds of allegations is to skip to the next paragraph. If there's any of that kind of language in the public meeting tonight, I will, as chair, I will interrupt you and I will refocus you on the topic. The personal attacks are never in order at city committees. So if that happens, you will be cut off and you will lose your right to speak. Members of the public have been very respectful in the public speaking sections up to this point. But I would just think that it needs to be reminded. And if you're a member of the committee, it's actually even more strict because there's the council code of conduct that also rules our behavior. So not that any of us would make a complaint about another member, but the code of conduct complaints can come from anyone that's watching the public meeting. So members of the committee are even more subject to rules of behavior, as in to be respectful to all members and staff of the public and of the committee. I think I'm making myself clear. There is a way to discuss any topic without resorting to personal attacks, and that's what I'm encouraging here tonight. I do believe that we are very close to going to the next step on this policy piece. And I'd just like to say as a point of recap that through all the deliberations, there seems to be almost unanimous agreement that something needs to be done. And so it's really, the debate is not about whether we need to do something. The debate is about how it should look. That's where we're at right now. And to go further into detail, like I was saying before, there's a recommendation attached to this file. You'll see it in the package. It is the most recent report, the recommendations that are attached to the most recent report. You'll see more than one recommendation there, and maybe the clerk can explain how that all works. So maybe I'll go to the clerk right now. Mr. Clerk, which recommendations will we be considering? And do we go in order B, C, D? And how do they relate to each other? And which is the one that is chronologically relevant at this point in time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Report number AP 20-033, which was originally presented at the November 25th special meeting, is before the committee. You will note in the recommendation that the second and third clause relates to removing the previous reports that were before the committee, which were under consideration at some time. Therefore, if the committee was to make a decision on the recommendation included in report AP 20-033, the two other reports listed on the agenda as business items C and D would be withdrawn, as it would be overtaken by events. So basically, item B is the only short-term rental matter before the committee this evening.
Thank you. Or to put it another way, as I understand it, if you start with item D, that's the oldest item, and you would have had to have been following the committee for over a year to see all the steps. But basically, the oldest item was item D. It was overtaken by item C, was because it was there was recommendation to council, and then council deferred it back to us with a new direction, correct? And then that direction itself came to us in February 13th, which is item C, and that was that is now being what is being proposed in item B is that be changed as described in item B, right? So that the original report be deleted and replaced with what is in item B. Is that another way of saying? Is that accurate?
That's correct. And as you mentioned, both items C and D include a brief paragraph explaining the direction that came out of those reports. And that kind of tells a more fulsome story on how we got to where we are today.
Right. So, and then just to remind everyone about how decisions get made in Kingston. So council is the decision-making body, city council. And the major committees, there's several major committees. This is one of them. It is the highest level of committee that there is under council. It reports directly to council with recommendations to council, but it is council that makes the decision. In this case, we recommended something to council, after a previous appearance of this item at this committee, and council considered that and deferred it back to us for a second round, which was February 13th. And then at that point, we, so has it been the property, Mr. Clerk? I'm going by memory. Has the report, or sorry, has the item short-term rental licensing been with the committee since February 13th? Or what, or did it come to us more
Mr. Chair, I
recently?
believe that is,
Yes.
I believe February of this year was when the matter was first considered.
Right. And then this committee itself deferred the item several times to future meetings of the same committee because we hadn't finished dealing with it and we weren't ready to make a recommendation to council. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So now we are at one of the, after multiple deferrals, we're at a point very close to be, I think, to being able to make a recommendation to council, but that remains to be seen depending on what direction the committee goes in tonight. So just so we don't get lost in the procedure and we don't start speaking to things that have already happened or have already been dealt with, I just thought it was important to have that context. So at our last meeting, which was the supplemental meeting, November 25th, and the minutes are attached to it tonight, we had a briefing from staff, essentially explaining their latest recommendation and the context around that. That briefing had several aspects, and then we had several members of the public speak in delegation, which is a formal way to address the committee. You apply in advance, you get your 5 minutes, you can use visuals, whatever. You make your points and you can be questioned by the committee after your 5 minutes. And we did all that with the delegations on November 25th. That was from the November 25th agenda item number 6, delegations. And then we finished with delegations, we went to briefings, we finished with the briefing, went to business. During the business portion, had we, Mr. Clerk, moved and seconded the recommendation, or were we in questions from members of the committee, or what point were we in business? Where were we in the agenda when we lost quorum?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you may recall, when we lost quorum, we were within the questions from members of the public. The committee completed the question portion. And I believe staff has a response to give tonight to the questions that were raised at the previous meeting. However, we can probably deal with that after we deal with any of the public who wishes to speak tonight, provided that they did not speak at the previous meeting.
So we were in the middle of compiling a list of questions and comments from members of the public. Each member of the public gets to speak once. And then we lost quorum during that time, and staff had not yet responded. So we have the staff response to the members of the public oral submissions, but we also have oral submissions from members of the public who didn't get a chance to speak when we lost quorum. So I guess that's the point where we're at right now, right, Mr. Clerk?
That is accurate, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so then, and I have this list from the minutes. Let me just pull it up here. It's on my third screen, which is my phone. Let me just find it here. I'm just being very, very thorough here because although it takes a few extra minutes at the beginning, it will help focus the discussion to where we need to go. We don't go down rabbit holes. So we have, let me see here, where is it? 1 second. Maybe, Mr. Clerk, do you have the list of speakers from the last meeting that had already spoken?
I believe my colleague Elizabeth has it readily available. Would you like her to read that list into the record? Or...
Yes, I would like that because that is where we were in the agenda. Madam Clerk, if you could read the names of the members of the public who spoke to the committee at the last meeting and who are awaiting a response from staff when we get to that point.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The names that I have who spoke at the last meeting were Alexander Legnini, Krista Leclerc, Claire Miller, Simon Andrew, Wilma Drake, Heather Ramsey, Suzanne Reed, Donna Radke, and Brenda O'Neill.
Thank you. So now we go down further on the speakers list for members of the public. So for that, I'm looking, so if you're a member of the public, you're watching the meeting right now, your time to speak is coming up. So ready yourself for that. So if you wish to speak to this item and you weren't on that list just read by the clerk, you may use the raise hand function on your Zoom screen, which is depending on how you've got it set up. It's usually near the bottom of your screen where it says participants. There's a raise hand button. If you can't find it, you may unmute. You have the permission to unmute yourself and just use your voice to alert the clerks to the point that you wish to speak.
So, Mr. Chair, the first speaker is Adrian Montgomery, and I'll just get them to unmute themselves.
Okay. Adrian Montgomery, you have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, councillors, for this opportunity to speak about the surveillance aspects of the proposal. The plan we heard was kind of creepy. We would never consent to the city telling a third party to poke into our affairs. We heard that hosts' booking calendars would be digitally monitored for irregularities, but what they call irregularities, I call my personal business practices. Private guests, family or charity, maintenance, illness, vacation, any number of reasons that are my own business. There may also be discounts for longer stays, which are, again, my private business, and these would affect assumptions about income. I'm perfectly capable of collecting and remitting MAT without guesswork by the city. I already do it for HST, and both the province and the federal authorities trust me to do that. This proposal for MAT assessment is kind of like billing me for imagined parking tickets based on someone spying on my car and my Yelp reviews, and then making me prove that I didn't walk or bike instead. That would be preemptively punitive and an invasion of my personal life, as is this proposal for third-party speculation on my business performance. Another thing staff don't acknowledge is that the carrot from the booking system is much bigger than the stick of treating us like tax cheats. We use these services because of insurance, communication, ID checks, money handling, and advertising. It would be stupid of us to rent privately, tremendous additional cost, and it would expose us completely to liability. We're not going to abandon the booking system because of MAT. Avoiding MAT just is not that big of a carrot. So what is the committee's carrot? Does the city hope to capture every penny of MAT? Is that worth an $18,000 spy? Where's the substantiation, the cost benefit analysis? We need this reality check. The proposed system is not only intrusive, it's a costly waste of time for hosts and for staff. Does the money the spying hopes to collect warrant the expense over simple automated reporting? Does it warrant the ill will arising from punitive, distrustful treatment of citizens, visitors, and small businesses? Is it worth deterring visitors and their tourism dollars when they hear that they're being spied on? Does it warrant the burden of proof it puts on me and the hosts who are presumed guilty of MAT avoidance until we prove our innocence? One goal of this proposal may be to force hosts into 30-day rentals. Some will do that. Some will simply drop out. Neither of those responses means more housing, but they do mean less MAT revenue. That's not a win. We offer a simple solution. We have given you each our cost-benefit analysis of the existing no-cost system. It demonstrates that there's no rational justification to approve this proposal as it is. Previously, several hosts provided sample reports to staff, produced with a single click in the booking system, reports that the system itself could provide with no more work by anyone. The dogged pursuit of a system that uses spy tactics on our citizens, visitors, and small business must arise from other purposes. It makes no sense for the purpose of MAT collection. I worry that this is an easy start into a gradually introducing more electronic surveillance in our city in the planning and bylaw enforcement without any informed debate or without citizens asking for it or approving it. Should this proposal pass, surveillance will become a major concern in the next election. Every candidate's position would be scrutinized, and as would the voting records. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just want to remind members of the public that even indirect allegations and insinuations are contrary to the rules of procedure. So be careful what you say about motivations of staff. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to speculate on ulterior motives that staff may have and things of the like. So be careful what you say if you want to retain the right to speak. Who is the next, Mr. Clerk? We're at public submissions, Councillor Schmidt.
The next member of the public to speak is Robert Lamothe, and I believe is now unmuted.
Okay, Robert Lamothe, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you. This is just kind of a tag on to what was previously very eloquently said. As an Airbnb host struggling to survive in the pandemic, I've been deeply distressed by this whole year-long bylaw mess. Totally not necessary in my opinion. I have no problem with my guests paying the MAT tax. Taxes have been put on the inn since day one and will ensure that my home business complies. I don't want to ruin my thing just for $4 a night or something like that. But I can't believe that my city wants to hire outsiders to spy on me. This has gotten out of hand and is totally unnecessary. I believe that you have all received a copy of a document which outlines a much simpler, less expensive option, which creates the registry of a short-term rental host, okay, that's set up on the web that the city wants, and that would generate more new MAT revenues than their coercive method that they're looking at right now. Unlike the SAF plan, ours is supported by a real cost-benefit analysis. If you haven't seen the document is, and you don't have a copy, Ron Hartley, I'm quite sure we'd be more than happy to give you a copy of it. Cost analysis. Our plan is fully acceptable to us as hosts, so could be quickly implemented without further delay and without wasting any more of your or our time. And very importantly, it doesn't require bringing electronic surveillance into our city. Choosing to vote for the simpler option will gain votes for you if you're thinking of running in the next municipal election, as opposed to gifting them to your opponents. What's not to like about that? Seriously, in the midst of pandemic, I can't imagine why the city would choose to take a more complicated, divisive, and disruptive route when it has a simpler alternative. I'm not a planner, though to me, it's smarter to first try a simple approach, like registering people, which respects the inherent honesty of the Kingstonians, such as myself and my fellow short-term rental hosts. Let's see how this simpler approach works, and then we can fine-tune it after a year. If we need to beef it up, we'll beef it up, of real life experiences. I believe the city will be pleased with the outcome and with the cooperation of short-term rental hosts. This will avoid taking an adversarial approach and places short-term rental hosts and the city together, working together to achieve the same common goal. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Lamothe. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Chair, currently there are no members of the public with their hand raised, so perhaps you can give the first and last call.
Mm-hmm. So if you are a member of the public and you wish to speak and have not yet spoken and you can't figure out how to raise your hand in Zoom, simply unmute yourself and say so. Hearing none, I would just, for the benefit of the committee, the submission on the addendum as an item of correspondence from Mr. Hartling was referenced by the last speaker. And if you're wondering about the details in that submission, you just go to the addendum and read the letter. It's a 3-page letter, I believe. All right. So I guess if there's no one else that wishes to speak, now it's members of it's city staff who have been keeping track of the comments and questions, have a chance to respond to all of the submissions from member of public. I believe, Mr. Clerk, that we've had around 15 members of the public speak to this. So it would go.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that sounds.
Yeah, give or take. I've been keeping a kind of a mental tally, but city staff has been writing down all the comments and has a chance now to respond. So we'll go to city staff. I see Mr. Campo, you have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm going to try as best as I can to umbrella all of the questions under one encompassing answer. I think it's important to start off with to say, in terms of the privacy concerns, the city has not entered any formal contract with LTS Technology Incorporations. Before any formalized contracts are signed, the city will be undertaking a third-party assessment, and that assessment encompasses data sensitivity, physical site security, privacy, and data access security. So the city will be doing a full review before we enter any kind of contracts in terms of the privacy. Again, when we're doing these reviews with Hermari, all the information being presented, again, is public knowledge. And to further make sure that we are understanding that would be this assessment provided by the city before we go into any kind of negotiations. I think it's also important to say that staff have communicated concerns that operators may not be willing to self-register. SCR operators may see little benefit in licensing their property until a complaint may be received requiring enforcement for a non-voluntary compliance with the legislation. Enforcement can be difficult. To act on a violation, bylaw enforcement must identify the unit that is being rented, prove that it is being rented on a short-term basis, and prove the number of stays that the unit is being rented for. The fact that the location is advertised is not adequate enough evidence for our enforcement or enforcement under this legislation to warrant a charge. We have had further communication with Airbnb since our last meeting. Airbnb also acknowledged that they use a third-party assessment to collect and remit the MAT tax on behalf of Airbnb themselves. We've inquired about more information from Airbnb. They would not put it in writing for us, but they've asked for a phone conversation on Monday, which we're happy to do. But again, we're going back to the understanding that we are trying to encompass all platforms, not just Airbnb. And that's what this proposal is trying to incorporate. If we're looking to go towards just working with Airbnb, we have tried to present to the committee concerns that we have about the remittance process. Based on our conversations with other municipalities, the remittance of the MAT collection is very vague. It does not hone down to specific addresses or details that helps the enforcement for this bylaw. So it makes things challenging with just working solely with Airbnb. I can defer also to my colleagues, Commissioner Agnew, if she would like to add anything further.
Is there anyone else from staff that would like to respond to the multiple comments from members of the public? Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I did record some additional questions specifically from our last meeting, namely specifically looking at whether there had been a consideration for occasional guests to supplement income and keep their homes. So definitely, this has been an iterative process. We have had an opportunity to engage with, a variety of stakeholders throughout this process. We have been working on this since partway through 2017 into 2018. And this work initially began with an overall review of residential licensing for all rental units, and a component of that we looked at was short-term rentals. So just in relationship to understanding the needs of the community and how short-term rentals for some individuals in the community has become an important part of how they supplement their income and how they're able to stay in their homes. We were able to consider all of that information through the process, and that is reflected in the bylaw that's before you tonight that has a couple of key things removed that addresses that specifically. Originally, we were proposing a 180-day cap with respect to short-term rentals, and that is very consistent with what you see in a number of other cities that have licensing programs. Again, regulating the length of stay per year. And one of those measures specifically, I would say, is really aimed at helping to protect the long-term housing industry, as well as finding a balance with the ability to provide short-term rentals. So from our original recommendation, we have removed that from the bylaw. The other key component as well is originally we were proposing an owner-occupied restriction. And again, that's a clause that we put in there, again, based on our best practice research and looking at what's effective in other municipalities at trying to, again, protect the long-term housing stock for the community and making sure that we don't have, a bunch of properties that are being purchased solely for the purpose of short-term rental market and not being monitored effectively, not being maintained effectively, which are some of the concerns that have come forward from other members of the community over the last couple of years about what's happening in my community. I see properties turning over. There's people coming and going. I'm feeling insecure about that. What's happening? What's the city doing about that? So we really have tried to hear the feedback, make pointed changes with respect to our recommendations. So on that question in particular, I feel like that is reflected in the work that's before the committee tonight. Also the same question with respect to home occupations. We had some questions about that early in the process and how, utilizing a property or your own property for stays or overnight stays would be different than someone that's, an accountant or a massage therapist or someone that's operating out of their home. So again, we do have a variety of businesses in the city that are licensed. So again, this is another type of business that we looked at the need to license. Again, based on the request of council, asking us to come back and deliver a framework and a program. So that's why we're here tonight. The other thing that I picked up in terms of the submission tonight was a comment about there not being any business case analysis. Because we've been at this for 2 years, I did want to make sure that for the committee's benefit, and this report was actually delivered to the previous term of council that then gave us direction to implement and bring back an implementing framework for the long-term or short-term rental program that you see tonight. So back in 2018, it was report AP-18016. That report that went to admin policies at that time, it included the business case analysis that was done for the long-term rental program as well as short-term. That was done by Watson Associates and presented, and that formed the basis of where our annual $180 cost that's recommended in the program that's before the committee tonight, where that came from, as well as looking at what the revenue projections would be, what the staffing requirements would be to be able to support the program. And again, that was looking at being able to implement a residential licensing program for all rental units in the city on the residential side, including short-term rentals as well. So I just wanted to draw the committee and the public's attention to that report because it's a couple years old, but it did form the basis of the recommendations that are before you this evening. I think those are all of the questions. Certainly there's been a lot of feedback and opinions that have been offered, but those are the questions that I had recorded in addition to what Mr. Compo has already provided as being directed to city staff through the public submissions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Agnew. I guess because there were 15 or so members of the public and because there were many questions, there were a lot of comments that followed the same sort of along the same topic. But I'll give this opportunity to members of the committee if there were any topics brought up by members of the public in their submissions and oral submissions that staff did not cover just now, and we could give them another chance. If you recall any aspect brought up by members of the public, so we don't miss anything, because there were multiple submissions over 2 meetings. Councillor Chappelle.
I'm wondering if Mr. Hartling would be able to explain the cost benefit analysis he's put forward on that response if he's in attendance.
Yeah, that's not a question to staff, Councillor Chappelle. I would say to that point, there is the item of correspondence, and it appears that Mr. Hartling has decided he did speak in delegation last time, and he has decided to submit a written submission, which we could take a moment and look at together if you like, but when we're in deliberations, but it's not in order to go back to members of the public that have not volunteered to speak and answer questions. That would have been during delegations last meeting. We had a chance to have a back and forth with the delegations. But if, so this is your last chance, members of the committee, to highlight any aspects that were brought up by members of the public that were not addressed by staff. Okay. Oh, yes, Councillor Speller, do you have one?
When staff member Kyle was mentioning about the comprehensive assessment of the technology for confidentiality purposes, and that they haven't actually negotiated an agreement with LTS Hamari. I'm wondering if that comprehensive assessment was done with the previous company, Host Compliance, and if so, what did they learn from that experience?
Okay, hold that thought, Councillor Chappelle. That question will be in order when we get to deliberations, so you'll have a chance to ask staff questions. This is specifically, say the third time, questions from members of the public that in the large volume of submissions, staff did not address. This is the only thing I'm interested in at this point. We're at staff response to members of the public. Seeing none, we will move on to the next phase, which is a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. And to remind you which recommendation, you go back to item 8B. At some point, I will read the recommendation, but you see it there, 8B, supplemental report, recommendations. We need a mover and a seconder, and once it's moved and seconded, I will read it out. This is once it's moved and seconded, we can move to deliberations and questions will be in order. Moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor McLaren. That the Administrative Policies Committee recommends that the following recommendation be approved and forwarded to Council for consideration on December 15th, 2020. Mr. Clerk, I believe that timeline is no longer possible. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As it was mentioned to you today, it appears that this matter is no longer time sensitive. So if the committee is willing, we would like to strike the first clause about fast tracking this to Council on the 15th, and then it will proceed to Council in January.
So the Council meeting on the 15th is this Tuesday. And what the clerk has just said is that it doesn't need to be there. That language was from the November 25th meeting, right? So do we have a mover and a seconder to strike that date from the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Bohm. Point of order, Councillor Bohm. You weren't moving it, I'm taking it.
Yeah, no. Is it possible to actually keep that in and actually meet that timeline?
Okay, well, so let's move in seconded and then we can deliberate it. Okay. So we need a motion. Well, actually, it doesn't matter when we have that question. So staff or the clerks, could you give us further information on the reason that is in the recommendation from November 25th and the reason why you're recommending that it be stricken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you look at the original recommendation from the November 25th report, there was a desire to fast track it to the December 5th meeting, or sorry, December 1st meeting. It is my understanding that when we updated the report to reflect today's meeting date, that the need to fast track the item was no longer required. However, I believe my colleague, Ms. Agnew, can provide some additional information regarding the time sensitivity of this matter.
Mm-hmm. I imagine, Ms. Agnew, had something to do with how long it takes to prepare the bylaw once council has approved it in draft form. But maybe you could give us some more information about the timelines on this.
Sure, thank you. And through you, one of the primary motivations for having the time sensitive clause was that council also needs to do an overall update to the mat collection bylaw in agreement that it has in place with Kingston Accommodation Partners for the hotel industry as it is now. And because what we were talking about was originally potentially having CAP as the industry that, or the agency that was going to be collecting mat on behalf of the city, we wanted to make sure that we had some clear direction from council before we brought that forward. But now that we're in a position where we've amended the recommendation to no longer have CAP included in the process of mat collection, and that what we're recommending is a self-remittance program that would be administered through the city, the time-sensitive clause is no longer required.
Okay. So just to sum that up, what the commissioner just told us is that the time-sensitive nature was tied to the original recommendation to have Kingston Accommodation Partners collect the mat from the hosts. They have since removed that recommendation, and it is no longer in the recommendation before us. And that is the reason that it is no longer time sensitive. So I guess we have to decide if we want to strike the December 15th reporting or not. If it does go to December 15th, it will be on the addendum. So I guess to fully debate it, we have to make a decision. So we need it moved and seconded and debated, and then we will vote. Unless there's no appetite to move it, and then it just dies. Councillor Bohm?
So I would move to put it on the floor as it currently stands so that we can move forward with the debate, but I don't want to take the dates out of it. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Okay. So maybe I'll put it to staff in a different way because I don't want to put staff in an awkward position. If we don't strike the December 15th wording from the recommendation and we recommend and this recommendation passes as is, will staff have time to so that it be included in the council package on Tuesday?
So, Mr. Chair, through you, if this matter was to proceed to the next council meeting, it would be included on the addendum, which is circulated around 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, as the council agenda has already been distributed. In the past, we have fast-tracked items before, so the usual process would be followed.
All right, so the committee is going to do what it wants to do, but I would say before we vote, we need to be fully aware of what we're asking of council. If we leave this in, council doesn't get any of this information until 2 hours before the meeting on Tuesday. Now, this is a file that's been in our possession for almost a year at this point and longer before that. That would mean that essentially as chair, I would need to make sure that all of my colleagues are aware of the situation before the addendum is made public, because I seriously doubt all of our colleagues will be able to process the nuances of this recommendation when it leaves committee in the 2 hours right prior to in the 2 hours, the busy 2 hours before the council meeting starts. I believe that the addendums have their time and place. They're useful, so you don't leave anything out, and you shouldn't defer an item because important information wasn't included, and so therefore you can use an addendum to get it included. In this case, we're talking about a whole recommendation, though, and and likely some discussion at council. So this could end up being a very long night on Tuesday if we keep this in. I just want to make sure you know what you're suggesting.
Councillor Stroud, Mr. Chair, I don't know if your conjecture is helpful. I think there's a will of the committee to have this go ahead. If that's the will, then let's just move on. It's up to councillors to take the time to review their material, and they should be well versed ahead of the council meeting. So a item like this coming up, I'm certain that the addendum would be sent out sooner than 4 o'clock. If anything, it would probably be sent out by the end of the week. So it would be ample time.
No, Councillor Chappelle, you just contradicted what the clerk just said. And I don't think you should minimize the reality of what happens when a large volume of information drops on you 2 hours before a meeting. You know what that means. It means there will be councillors forced to vote on something that they haven't read. Is that your intention?
I was just commenting through your chair that it's up to each individual councillor to be prepared for the meeting. And so I don't think the conjecture on them being ill prepared is something we can pose on our fellow councillors. And certainly if this was to pass through tonight, we can all take 1 councillor each and notify our respective member if we wish to take a collective approach. And that's certainly one way we could do it. So, I mean, this document is published on our shared drive. We can direct our fellow councillors to it, give them the heads up, and we could do that in as a courtesy to them. So I think there's a real desire to have some sort of closure on this topic at some point, and perhaps it's sooner than later.
I agree that closure is needed. Absolutely. I think all 5 of us agree on that. But the reality of realistically expecting to be able to deal with this in an expedient manner at a council meeting this Tuesday is unrealistic. And so what will likely happen is either a deferral, another deferral, so that councillors have time to digest, or a very long dealing of this item at council on Tuesday. And as long as you're aware of what that means, as chair of this committee, I need to make sure that the reason we are doing this is a valid reason and is transparent. So perhaps someone could explain how are we going to get, when it took us this long to get to this point, how are we going to get our colleagues to wrap their heads around this, all the nuances in this by Tuesday? Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So obviously the convoluted file, it is something that's gone on for, quite some time. I believe that the public and also staff have just become somewhat, and as well as other councillors and committee members have become somewhat fatigued with this. To say that the other councillors are not aware of it, I would respectfully disagree. Maybe all aren't following it closely, but I myself have had conversations with 2 or 3 others. So, and just recently about this. So I think to Councillor Chappelle's point, if there's not a way that it could become available short of the addendum, then the onus would be on us, and I would certainly reach out to other councillors and make myself available to discuss it with them, to give them any information that I have or as being part of this process throughout the entire thing, to ensure that they're prepared for Tuesday. One of the reasons I'd like to see this come forward on December 15th is simply to give closure to this, to actually start the next steps. I believe it would give direction to staff, and I also believe it would give closure to the STR hosts, and not have this hanging over everybody's heads over the holidays this year, as there's already been, enough things kind of on everybody's minds. So really, I just think that pushing it into January or even February of next year just continues to drag it out. At that point, I'm not sure how many of our councillor colleagues that aren't on the committee are going to take the time over the holidays to really go into it, and we're just going to be dragging it out further. So I believe the onus is on us as committee members to ensure that our colleagues that have concerns and or questions about this and we take the time to inform them, before Tuesday's meeting, so that this could appear on the addendum and they would be well versed in any concerns that they have. I would definitely make myself available to address those. And also, we're not sure what version of this is actually going to pass tonight. So I myself have an amendment that could make this a lot more palatable to a lot of people. So, I mean, to go to all these other counselors and try to verse them in all of the things that brought us to this point when it's really the end product, which is the goal. So, I mean, we can definitely do that, but if they're satisfied with the end product and they trust the motivations of this committee and the long work that we've done on this, then at that point, I would hope that they would ask any questions of us that they have and also look at the final result that came out of all the committee deliberations on this. So I would offer that. Thank you.
Look, I will respect the will of the committee on the timing. However, when this item consumes several hours on Tuesday, do I have the permission to tell you I told you so? Because when you drop something on someone at the very last minute, they're forced to deal with it in real time. And that's what you're going to see on Tuesday. You're going to see questions. You're going to see more questions. You're going to see more attempts to defer, or there's going to be all kinds of controversy at council. If that's what you want, then that's fine. But personally, I understand what's at stake, and I know all the possible permutations that could happen tonight. And I am foreseeing this to be a complex file when it comes to council, as it should be, because it's a complex issue. If you think council is ready to do that on Tuesday, that's fine, but we all share equal responsibility for taking our part in the debate to make sure that councillors are fully aware of everything here, because there's no way this is not going to be a unanimous vote tonight. It's not going to be a unanimous vote at council. Right? So how is democracy served by trying to rush things?
Through Mr. Chair, we can certainly save time on Tuesday night if you commit to not speaking to this matter by council.
You guys elected me chair of the committee. I take my responsibility.
We love you. Just come on. I'm just
come on. Yes, come on. And what you're trying to do is force a decision on something, hoping that it'll go your way, because council hasn't thought about it long enough. That's what it sounds like to me. So if that's what you think, that can backfire, as long as you understand what you're getting yourselves into. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, with how long this file's gone on, I'm more than prepared and committed to spend 2 hours talking about it at council Tuesday if we have to move this forward. This is far too important a file, and it's almost got stuck in purgatory. It's in zombie mode right now. So somehow we have to move this forward. We've already spent, I don't even know what time it is right now, but we're probably already an hour into it here. So this is a big file. It's convoluted. I'm hoping that my amendment will bring some clarity to it. But if it takes 2 hours to get through it, after all the work and effort that's gone into it on Tuesday night, I think that's well worth it. I don't think it's ever going to not take some time to get through. So in my mind, I don't think we're rushing it. I think we're just bringing closure to it so that we can begin the next steps. Also free up the STR host to understand what the process will be like looking forward and give staff the direction to start implementing whatever process we decide. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, question back to the clerk. Is there any way the result of tonight's meeting can be communicated to council, even if it's not publicly? Is it in order for the clerks to communicate what the result of this file's recommendation, whatever it looks like, can be communicated to all of council before tomorrow, or like by the end of tomorrow? Is that possible?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. It would be possible in all likelihood. I can confer with the deputy clerk, but we can probably send out an addendum tomorrow with this business item on it, similar to how the procedural bylaw matter was circulated to this committee last Friday. So given the emphasis on the importance of this discussion stemming from this debate, I'm sure we can place that on the agenda tomorrow for the public.
Okay, thanks. I would hate for this to get sent back to us because people aren't ready to make a decision on Tuesday. Right? Do it once, do it right. Okay, so if nobody is moving an amendment to strike the December 15th date from the recommendation, I will continue on with reading the recommendation. So that is the timing. That is the first clause. It speaks only to timing. Second clause is from the February 13th meeting. And it is asking for the deletion of that entire recommendation and then to be replaced with the following. That's the second clause. That the recommendation presented to AP committee on February 13th be deleted and replaced with the following. Okay, so you're following me so far. So now the staff is recommending the following. That the recommendation be presented to council on December 3rd, 2019. Sorry, that the recommendation that was presented to council on December 3rd, 2019, report 20-001 be deleted or replaced with the following. So that you'll see how many times the recommendation has changed here. This is just the historical record. And you'll notice there's an indentation each time. So now we're on the fourth indentation. But the draft bylaw attached as Exhibit A to report number AP 20-033 be approved. The bylaw 2018-095, a bylaw to the City of Kingston to establish the municipal accommodation tax, be amended as per Exhibit B to report AP 20-033. And that bylaw 2015-159, a bylaw to establish procedures for the appeals committee to conduct appeals to property standard orders in accordance with the Building Code Act and appeals to license and permit decisions in accordance with City of Kingston licensing bylaws as amended, be further amended as per Exhibit C to report number AP 20-033. And that bylaw number 2020-69, a bylaw to establish a process for administrative penalties be amended, as amended, be further amended as per Exhibit D to report number AP 20-033. The council authorized the mayor and clerk to execute a contract for a period of up to 1 year with LTAS Technologies Incorporated for the Harmari technology platform for the provision of address and identification related to short-term rental accommodations in a form satisfactory to the Director of Legal Services and City Solicitor. And that within 1 year of implementation of the draft bylaw, a bylaw to license and regulate short-term rentals in the City of Kingston, and prior to the renewal of any agreements with LTAS Technologies Incorporated, staff provide a report to the Administrative Policies Committee with an evaluation of the effectiveness of the draft bylaw, with the report to contain the following information. A, the number of different short-term rental providers and the total number of short-term rental units. B, the total dollar amount of municipal accommodation tax collected by provider type platform method collected. C, details of instances where the bylaw was enforced and methods used to enforce the bylaw. D, total administrative costs spent on implementation of the bylaw. And E, any amendments to the bylaw if necessary. That is the end of the recommendation. And we need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Bohm.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's actually been moved by Councillor Bowman and Councillor McLaren.
Oh, it was already moved. That's right. That's right, because I asked for it to be moved and seconded before I went in. It's already moved and seconded. Who would wish to speak? So, Mr. Clerk, remind us of the committee procedures. Moved and seconded. We're in deliberations. Questions are in order. And what about visiting councillors?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for mentioning the visiting councillors. Basically, we're in deliberations right now. So if staff require further clarification of, Members of the committee require further clarification of staff. They could ask questions. However, the committee can just debate at this point if that's their will. And the committee is also able to amend or defer the matter at this juncture in the meeting.
And with the visiting councillors, what happens?
Once the committee members proper have had an opportunity to speak, it would be appropriate for the guest councillor, who is Councillor Hutchison, to offer his comments. However,
Okay,
they are
so
not.
Councillor Hutchison, you'll have a chance to comment once all members of the committee have had an opportunity to speak. Councillor Bohm, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So this is, as everybody knows now, it's been a pretty convoluted file. A lot of work on either side, and two sides that basically somehow we have to get to meet in the middle. So with that being said, I've done some work in the past week with some staff members and also Councillor Chappelle, and we've come up with a amendment to this that hopefully is a workable compromise. It should eliminate a lot of the concerns about having third-party, out-of-city, agencies or whatever you will call them, spying in a sense, and bring Airbnb in as basically one of the ways that we would collect the mat tax through their platform, which requires us passing a bylaw. Further to that, for the remaining 15%, internally with our own staff, they could come up with that, and then basically hopefully that is a workable compromise that allows us to sort of pass this and move this forward. So with that being said, it's already been shared with the committee clerk, so if you could put that up there, and perhaps the chair could read it out, and then we could debate the amendment and hopefully pass it. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, do we have? Yes, we do. So it's on screen. Are members of the public able to see that as well, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, it should be.
Okay, I'm gonna have to zoom in, I think. Get out my glasses, even worse. Hang on, there we go. Oh, did you do that? Because I can see it much better now. Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. It looks to be relatively lengthy. And as I read it, Mr. Clerk, maybe you can scroll down so I can read the entire amendment. So moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Chappelle, that the recommendation as outlined in report number AP 20-033 be amended as follows. Insert the following as the fifth clause of the revised recommendation. So this is a new clause, that upon approval of the draft bylaw attached as Exhibit A to report number AP 20-033, staff be directed to enter into negotiations with Airbnb for the purpose of entering into a voluntary collection agreement for the collection and remittance of the municipal accommodation tax. And that's that clause. Insert the following as the sixth clause of the revised recommendation. Staff be directed to report back to council in May 2021 if it is anticipated that negotiations regarding a voluntary collection agreement with Airbnb will not be completed by the June 1st, 2021 implementation date for the draft bylaw attached as Exhibit A to the same report, and delete the eighth clause. Is that supposed to be eighth? Like number, like the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth?
Yes, it's the eighth paragraph of the original recommendation.
So there's a very minor typo there. There's no H at the end of 8, indicating that it's possessive. That's okay. Delete the eighth clause of the original recommendation, which reads as follows. So we're deleting this. We're deleting this clause that I'm about to read. That council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a contract for a period of 1 year with LTS Technologies, their maritime technology platform provision address identification related to short-term rental donations and forms satisfactory to the director of legal services and city solicitor. So delete that in quotes and replace the clause with the following. So it's a straight replace. Okay. That council authorized the mayor and clerk to execute a voluntary collection agreement for a minimum of 1 year with Airbnb for the collection and remittance of the municipal accommodation tax in a form satisfactory to the director of legal services and city solicitor, and that staff be directed to develop an internal municipal accommodation tax collection process for short-term rental operators that do not use the Airbnb platform, end quote. So that is, so you're deleting one clause, the 8th clause, and putting in 2 clauses. So it'd be an 8th and a 9th clause, I guess. And then insert the words "to the renewal of any volunteer collection agreements" to the final clause of the recommendation, and delete the words "to the renewal of any agreements with LCS Technologies Incorporated," so that it would read as follows: that within 1 year of implementation of the draft bylaw and prior to the renewal of any volunteer collection agreements, staff provide a report to the Administrative Policies Committee with evaluation of the effectiveness of the draft bylaw. The report to contain the following information. Okay, so that's just a straight deletion in the middle of that clause. Do you have oh, there you go.
Sure.
Have an amended motion. So if the amendment passes, this, I think I understand that this is what the how the recommendation would read with the amendment if it passes. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. The adjustments, which include additions and deletions, are outlined in red.
Okay, I don't think I'm going to read it all. We'll just leave it up on the screen for a minute. So it's the original recommendation with the red parts are the amendment, and the stroked out red parts are the deletions. Right? So there's some things that the red things that are not stroked out are added, though that's the extra 4th and 5th clauses, I think. And then the 8th clause was stroked out, and the new wording below. That's the two clauses that were added in the 8th and 9th clauses. And then the deletion in the middle of the 10th clause, I guess, or the new 10th clause. Right. So that's basically what it looks like if the amendment passes. That's what the amended motion, how the amended motion would read. But everybody remember that we're on the amendment right now, and we haven't dealt with the recommendation as a whole completely yet. This is the first proposed amendment, and after that we go back to the recommendation as a whole. So what is in order now, Councillor Bowman's already spoken, what is in order now is comments, questions on the amendment itself, but not necessarily on the recommendation as a whole, although this amendment sort of changes the entire recommendation. So you'll probably be able to speak to both as long as you're talking about the amended motion. That's the way that you speak to the amendment, is by speaking to the amended motion or to the amendment clauses. So would anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Chappelle, to the amendment.
Yes, to you, Mr. Chair. The premise of this motion is really to bring two very polar sides together and move forward in a positive direction in baby steps. If we can have 85% compliance of the STR rental group, demonstrate that it's effective. Once they can advertise, they're authorized by the City of Kingston, registered by the authorized City of Kingston, and demonstrate some of that effort, show goodwill. I think we can move forward and repair some of the conflict that we've had. I think it's a very good compromise.
Okay, Councillor Osterhoff.
Sorry, I guess I'm not supposed to touch that, am I? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with Councillor Chappelle, and it would have been very hard for me to support the original bylaw as presented. With the volume of emails and letters and phone calls, and I have been part of this. I'm new to this committee at this particular time, but I was on the committee the first 2 years and or something like that. So I did follow it very closely, and I don't think I need to get into it right now, other than I'm very familiar with regulations, regulatory oversight, and as a professional career. And I have to agree with many of the letters that this approach is almost an adversarial design with the surveillance, and we just, as Canadians, we're not ready for that, and we don't need that. I think that there's a greater understanding. I think there's been progress on both sides, and I think that this amendment accomplishes what we really know in our hearts we want, and then we get to fine tune it. We get to have a better Christmas now by moving it through for everyone, and we know that good can come from this, and both sides will come together. The taxes will be collected, registrations and licensing I'm still in favor of, and I think this is the way to go for the better of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McTurnan, do you wish to speak? Councillor Hutchison, do you wish to speak? I can't see him. Which part panels? I don't see a hand. Okay. Councillor Bohm, you will have the last word, but maybe Councillor McTurnan or Councillor Osterhoff, maybe Councillor Osterhoff, you could take the chair, so that you're deputy mayor. So maybe you could take the chair, so I could.
I will take the chair, and I recognize you.
Thank you. So I'm speaking now as Sydenham councillor, not as chair of the committee. Sydenham may be under the most pressure in the city, but it definitely is up there. There are multiple complaints I've got in my emails, also oral comments to me about the problem with unregulated Airbnbs in Sydenham district. So things like party houses, things like multiple rentals, short-term, like 1 or 2 days, with the parking and the coming and going of unknowns in what would otherwise be a fairly tight-knit setting. I'm thinking of places like Churchill Crescent, places near Queens. There's obviously a lot of demand for folks coming and visiting their kids at Queens, or homecoming people. In fact, my own classmates, when we did our last homecoming, they rented an Airbnb, and I spent some time in a beautiful unit down near Market Square that was through Airbnb. And everybody in my district knows what Airbnb represents, and many of them take advantage of it when they travel. I've heard that, but the word on the street seems to be that we need to regulate. So luckily, that's not really what this amendment is suggesting. The amendment is not suggesting not regulating, so that's good. And to the comments that we need to move forward and get something done, I wholeheartedly agree. Residents of Sydenham are concerned about the security problems that come with unregulated units. We've all heard horror stories, but I've actually got anecdotal stories of problems in my district. Basically, it's a short-term absentee landlord situation, or can be, where the host isn't actually there. They've rented it to someone online who's paid them online. They show up, they get in, and then there's no real monitoring of the property for that time. And you can imagine at a time of like homecoming or anything to do with a Queen's party, whether it's undergrads or alumni, and they can all be guilty of misbehavior with the alcohol that's involved. You can imagine what that means in stable neighborhoods. So I absolutely take this seriously, and I speak with full confidence that regulation is the way to go, for the primary reason that will allow staff, as they do with bylaw enforcement of any kind of yards or property, infractions. The bylaw enforcement serves a very vital role in the city, keeping property up to their standards, right? Property standards, and enforcing them. Usually it's without fines. Usually it's just by speaking to the owner. But that kind of eyes on the street from staff is absolutely crucial. And without licensing, without regulation, they have no recourse, no way to do that. Staff can't help us at all. Also involved, though, is the ability to modify behaviors from the point of view of staff. So that's where the clauses B, C, D come in of the original recommendation, right? The appeals, the enforcement, and the way that staff can intervene if necessary. Now, unfortunately, that's all complaint driven normally. Bylaw infractions are complaint driven. And that is the reason for the original suggestion that there be a software company that develops something that can keep tabs on the online activity and give us an idea of what's happening. So when you remove that, as this amendment does, the obvious question is, okay, so Airbnb can remit the MAT. That's probably straightforward. I agree with that aspect. But what do we do if, as staff is suggesting, we not so much that we don't get all the tax money, but what do we do when there's unregulated properties that have not voluntarily self-registered? We're back to that. Airbnb can't guarantee a number of compliance. They can't guarantee the kind of compliance that staff is suggesting we would get with a third-party information gathering company. So I don't see how you can be in favor of the amendment, but you can't claim that Airbnb.
30 seconds, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can't claim that Airbnb will be able to fulfill that function. So I suspect this amendment is a great first step, but I suspect that it is an incomplete treating of the file. And we'll probably hear from staff that things will still be needed in the future. And so the only question would be, do we add them now through another amendment, or do we wait for the staff report? So I'm going to wait to hear what others have to say on this, but I'm inclined to consider either another amendment on the main motion or voting against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll return the chair to you, or do you want me to carry on with any further comments? To Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, I believe your colleague, Councillor Hutchison, actually has a comment I'd like to make.
Thank you for that. I can't see that. Okay, Councillor Hutchison, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't get through before. I was cut off at source. It wasn't my end, it was at your end. And the chair couldn't see me, nor could he hear me. This is apropos to an item coming up later. I don't have a lot to say at the moment. I'll probably have more to say when it comes to council. I did want to ask a question, if I may, Mr. Chair, to staff, if that's okay. Can I just do that?
I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. So did I hear properly that Airbnb uses a third-party compliance enforcement regarding its own fees?
Is this question related to the amendment?
Yep, it's what I related to the whole bylaw.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Campo was speaking, I think, at the time.
Yeah, I thought I heard that too. Can a member of the staff answer that? I see, yes, Commissioner Agnew, thank you.
Thank you, and through you. So I'll jump in, and then if Mr. Campo has any additional comments, I invite him to provide those after I'm done speaking. So that's correct, Councillor Hutchison, you did hear that correctly. Through further discussions with Airbnb, trying to get some additional details about what the Airbnb's MAP platform for collection looks like, what their auditing capabilities are in terms of our own financial reconciliation and balancing process. We came to understand through discussions with them that the MAT collection process is not administered by Airbnb directly. It's actually done through a third party.
Okay.
Thank you.
They're reviewing their own clients, I guess. Which raises some questions I think everybody knows about the whole idea of surveillance and what is publicly available and so on. It also raises the issue that the chair raised, which I would have thought would be more important to people, which was the issue of free riders. Without the compliance, we won't know whether everybody's paying who should be paying, or they're paying as much as they ought to be paying. And that means the honest people will pay a lot more, relatively. That's usually what that means. That's why we have enforcement around taxation. Same thing happens, right? It's an imperfect system, as I'm sure everybody knows, but it probably keeps more people in line than we wish to think of. So I'm concerned about a few things that are being removed. I see the temptation for the amendment. Incidentally, looking online, you could not read the amendment. Okay.
Okay. I could hear, so I'm not sure. What does anybody else have a problem reading the amendment?
You had it posted up.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, for further interest, it couldn't be read. Okay. So I tried to blow it up and everything, and didn't work. So I just wanted to put that in there. So I'm concerned about some of the things that have been removed in order to make this more palatable for some. But the bottom line is, for me, as Councillor Stroud indicated as well, he was concerned about behavior related to short-term rentals, and also about the protection of the rental housing stock, which is observably being affected by short-term rentals in Kingstown. There's just no getting around it. So I'll just leave it at that. And we'll see how this all turns out.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hutchison. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment?
So if I may,
Yes,
Mr. Deputy Mayor, if you don't mind if I take the chair back and let us.
You got it.
Yeah,
sir.
so kind of the only one left that can speak now is Councillor Bowman, because we've all spoken and he gets to speak last. So go ahead, Councillor Bowman.
Mr. Chair, and through you, I do appreciate some of the concerns that were brought up. And I mean, the whole idea of this amendment is it's not a perfect solution. I don't believe there necessarily is one in this case that would bring both sides to a point where they both felt perfectly satisfied. But the whole idea of this is to take us to the next step. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be versions of this in the future that aren't amended. It doesn't mean that timelines might not shift as far as the staff implementing something, as far as, you know, for the other 15%. As far as the Airbnb though, I want to remind people that when STR hosts sign up to use Airbnb, they do accept their terms and agreements, which I'm sure would mention that they use a third party to monitor. So this is the difference of, instead of us pushing a third party on that somebody is not accepted, somebody's voluntarily signing up, deciding to use Airbnb and accepting those terms. So they have basically said, yes, I'm going to allow you, because I'm using your platform, to monitor me using this other party, because it's full disclosure there. So there's a difference there. That's not us pushing somebody on them. That's them saying, yes, I accept this. And there's a key difference there when they sign up with Airbnb, just as we all agree to the terms and conditions when we sign up for a credit card or something like that, as opposed to having a credit card company just kind of pushed on us and said, you will follow this rule. So the other thing is about Councillor Hutchison's comments about free riders. I don't believe in this instance that if there are people that are non-compliant, it actually increases the cost because it's a set percentage. So it would not increase the cost to the other MAT tax holders. So I just wasn't sure that comment really made a lot of sense, because the cost increases. It's not that we're trying to collect $200,000 a year from all the short-term rental hosts. And if we can only find 180 of 200 of them, then the 180 pay that total cost. It's just a percentage based on stay, unless I'm totally misunderstanding this. So in that case, there would not be additional costs for the ones that basically are paying and following the rules. The other thing I want to point out is short-term rental hosts don't actually collect the money. It just at this point would go to Airbnb, and that's why it would be remitted through them. So they're not actually physically holding the money. It's not like they can hold it back. They don't actually have it in their hand. So that, at least with the Airbnb platform. The other thing to keep in mind here is the fact that, especially with Airbnb, is we're likely going to get 85% compliance. So at least that does move it forward. And in the grand scheme of things, going from 0 to 85 is probably a pretty good ratio. The other thing to consider is that we want a level playing field. So when staff comes up with their way of monitoring it internally, you can be darn sure that the other short-term rental hosts, if they catch wind of somebody bragging that they're not complying with it, or part of the other 15%, they want a level playing field as well. So I'm sure they would have no qualms about coming in and basically saying to that person, hey, you better comply because this actually benefits the entire city. In this entire endeavor, I have yet to hear from a single short-term rental host that said they disagree with paying the tax. So in my mind, let's extend the olive branch to them. Let's use the carrot instead of the stick, and let's take a year to educate them and come up with a good collaborative process that brings people to the table, and then work on better solutions going forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bohm. Just want to point out for just sake of clarity, the 85% number that many people have quoted is an estimate of the number of hosts in Kingston that are currently using Airbnb. Just so that it's clear, that's what the 85% is referred to. It's an estimate of how many hosts are with Airbnb right now, of the total number. All right, well, that's the debate on the amendment. So now we have to call the question on the amendment. Only the 5 of us have a vote. There can be no tie vote here, so we're making a decision right now. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? And that amendment passes. We're back to the motion as amended, which to Councillor Hutchinson's point, Mr. Clerk, can we get the motion as amended back up on the screen?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Just give.
Okay. So again, the red is now officially part of the motion. And the December 15th date is still there. The second and third clauses are the sort of historical deletion of former recommendations. The in-play recommendation starts with the indentation, the first clause that's not in red, and then the 2 red clauses, and then the red that's been crossed out is actually no longer part of the recommendation. It's been removed by amendment. Okay, and then it carries over to the next page, I believe. So just to highlight the timelines, can you go back up, Madam Clerk? So yes, so right at the bottom of that page in red, that council authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute a voluntary collection agreement. Oh, it's gone. No, go back down. Go back down. Back further down. Further down. Right to the bottom of this page. Bottom of this page. The council authorized the mayor and clerk to execute a voluntary collection agreement for a minimum of 1 year with Airbnb, the protection and remittance of the municipal accommodation tax. And then there's the report in the which clause is that? The 10th clause. Within 1 year, yeah. So that's actually, the amendment didn't change that. So the report in 1 year is still there, but there is another date somewhere. Can you go back up? I just want folks to know before we vote on the entire motion, what the current timelines are.
Mr. Chair, if I may, there's
there.
3 date.
Yeah, there it is there. The cursor was on it. So report back in May 2021. So it's my understanding that unless it's further amended, this recommendation to council, if passed by council, would get a staff report in May about the status of the negotiations, about the voluntary collection agreement, which the amendment inserted, in time for the June 1st, 2021 implementation date. And then another report after 1 year. So that would be, if this is a question to staff, the last clause that talks about a year, a report after 1 year, would that then be June 2022 or May 2022, or would that be December 2021? That would be the last clause that asks for a report after 1 year.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, are you able to clarify who you were asking that question to?
Sure. So there's 2 dates in the amended recommendation. One specifically has a date, it's May 2021. And that is the first report about the status of the negotiations with Airbnb about the voluntary agreement.
Sure, perhaps.
And then the
Mr. Chair,
second
if we could
one
just
is
stop there
on, yeah, so that one, no, that one's fairly clear, but it's the second one I'm asking a question about. The one from the last clause that asks for a report in 1 year, is that 1 year from now, from when council passes it, or is it 1 year from when the bylaw takes effect?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think the thinking on that would be to have us report back to council a year from the time that the bylaw is in place, so that the bylaw would be operating in place for a full year. We would do a full year of collection with respect to the MAT and the implementation of licenses, and then report back to council with the full year's worth of data.
So that would be May, I guess by May 2022 then.
But yeah, it would be by the end of, because the bylaw is in effect by June 1st of 2020, which is what's recommended. A year from then would just be to the end of May of from that point of time, yeah, of 2022.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. So there's basically a report in May 2021 and another report in May 22 thereabouts. If this passes council. I wanted those timelines to be clear. Now we are on deliberations. So Councillor Bowman has spoken to the main motion. Now we're on the rest of us for deliberations on the main motion. The recommendation as amended. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry about that. Okay. The question I have is if this passes, Mr. Chair, do we at council have an opportunity to amend it there as well?
It starts back up after Christmas break.
Yes. So this recommendation from the committee goes to council. If it passes here, it goes in the positive. If it fails here, it still goes to council, but in the negative. Yeah. And then it becomes the property of council, and council can as always amend, defer, whatever.
Okay. The one question that I think might be missed, or a question or concern, and it will be a question too, is that is a member of the stakeholder group of short-term rentals, are they on CAP? The CAP board? Is there a representation of
question to staff? Is there a member of the Short-Term Rental Hosts Association on the Kingston Accommodation Partners board?
Thank you, and through you, not to my knowledge. I believe that that Ms. LeClaire in our last meeting of admin policies, in terms of her oral submission, had included some information about some conversations that perhaps she had with members of the Kingston Home Share Association, and providing some thoughts about opportunities with becoming engaged with CAP, but maybe more at a work group level as opposed to a member of the board. But that's not something that I'm involved with directly. So I can't say for certain, but to the best of my knowledge, no, they currently do not have a place on the board. And I think that's been some of the concern, is how to get them engaged with an organization that essentially is working to help the entire tourism industry, and making sure that there's some representation with respect to short-term operators within that organization.
Yeah, thank you. We completely agree on that. I mean, that's really what seems to be missing here, especially if this goes ahead. Licensing and tax collection, I think a voice is very important, and there would be restructuring of CAP, however that could be done. But in the meantime, I between now and Tuesday, I would suggest that there be a stakeholder group established and recognized to begin dialogue, and to be, so like, I mean, the issue is who are you dealing with? I mean, that's what you really should have. Well, I guess that'll be established through the Airbnb registration and licensing. So, but it's just a strong recommendation on my part, is that there needs to be participation in CAP, which is very influential and does great work, and that this group should be part of that. But that's my opinion. I don't know how to change that, but I think that down the road we should make ways to ensure that. And I'm not sure if that's through administrative policies or not, but I think we could look into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osterhoff. That's an excellent point, Mr. Deputy Mayor, about the avoiding the situation where we've got taxation without representation. So that recommendation was in one of the reports, that there be representation in that sense, when CAP was envisaged as the one to collect from everyone. But even if they're not, they do influence the decisions around how to spend the map itself, right? That goes to 65% of it goes to tourism marketing for Kingston. So if the hosts are paying into that, they need representation at that table, absolutely. And that is missing from the current recommendation.
Yes.
So that's an excellent point. Thank you for pointing that out. No matter what you think about this recommendation, that point is valid. Anyone else wish to speak to the amended motion? Councilor McCann, I can't see you. Or do you wish to speak? No. Okay, well then, Councilor Osterhoff, I'll ask to relinquish the chair again, so I can speak on behalf of sitting residents.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll take the chair, and I recognize you.
Thank you. So I didn't support the amendment because of the reasons stated, but now that it's passed, I recognize the authority of this body, and I do agree with the majority of the thrust of the amended motion. As Councillor Bohm said, what's important is that we move this forward. He called it a zombie issue, and by that I understand you meaning that it sits in committee without any action taken to establish a bylaw. We know that Airbnb, for one, will not even begin negotiations without a bylaw being passed by the municipality. So clearly that's a priority. And although I believe that in its current form it is incomplete, any bylaw that establishes rules of any kind for licensing of short-term rentals and for the collection of the MAT is an improvement on what we have now. We've known since 2018, when we, I think it was the first thing that the council did this term, passed the MAT tax collection for the hospital, the hotel sector. The CAO told us at that time that there was a missing piece, and it was the short-term rental rules, and we knew that at that time. So we've known about this issue all along, and that is not rectified until we get a bylaw in the books. A bylaw may be problematic. We don't know the answer to that until we start seeing the reports back. This motion does ask for 2 reporting points. The one to report the state of negotiations with Airbnb, and the second one, state of everything after 1 year that the program's been in effect, licensing and the map collection. Both those reports will be crucial to determining what is missing from the bylaw. But that's all written into this recommendation in the last clause. So I actually think that we're most of the way there with this amended recommendation, as much as I still believe it will be necessary to somehow gather information about the total picture if we want to deal directly with the housing crisis, as we've all pretty much stated. Pretty much every meeting we state that there's something must be done about the housing crisis. To tie this to the housing crisis, we will need complete information, and I'm not sure we're going to get that from Airbnb. However, I'm willing to wait for the report. I'm willing to be patient and wait for the reports to come in. Therefore, I believe on the balance that I am confident if this committee passes the recommendation, it does actually improve the state of this file in the city of Kingston, and therefore I will be voting for the amended recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll return the chair to you.
Thank you. So I've spoken. Councillor McLaren doesn't wish to speak. Councillor Chappell, have you spoken to the entire motion? Do you wish to speak? No, it's okay. Councillor Hutchison, you have the right to speak to the motion before we vote. I don't see a hand. Let me just check. No, I don't see. Oh, here you are.
No, I'll just say that, as I said, I understand the impetus behind the amendment. I think I'll just say I think Councillor Bohm was replying very well to a point that I wasn't trying to make, but nevertheless, it was a good point he made, and so we'll go forward. We'll see what happens at council, and I think the chair and the advocates of the amendment both made themselves quite clear, and so we struggle forth. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. I feel like we're very close because I'm about to call the question on the amended recommendation. If passed, it goes to council, and council would be dealing with it on Tuesday. So I will do so. I call the question on the motion as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that actually passes as a unanimous motion of the committee, which is kind of shocking after all the ins and outs of this file. Well done. We move on back to the agenda. Hang on. A point of order, Councillor Spell.
Well, I was just going to call for my colleague, Councillor Kiley, to join us, but he's arrived. So thank you.
Welcome back, Councillor Kiley. That was amazing timing. All right, so we've dealt with the short-term rental file, and now we are going to the next part, which is going back to the agenda item that was on the addendum, which is the procedural bylaw. So this is by item 8E, a bylaw to provide rules for governing the order of procedures of the council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, and to repeal bylaw number 2010-1 as amended in its entirety and corresponding amendment to committee bylaw 2010-205. So this is another complex file. There's a recommendation with 2 clauses here. And there's a report from Commissioner Joyce. The city clerk was involved, and I'll go to staff now to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to be here in attendance tonight to speak to this particular item. I believe you'll agree with me that a regular review of procedural bylaw is a worthwhile and necessary endeavor to ensure that it meets legislative requirements and continues to serve council in the public in an open and transparent manner. The current bylaw was enacted on June 15, 2010, and has been amended on 11 occasions since the enactment. Staff undertook a comprehensive review of the current procedural bylaw with the intent to modernize the provisions of the bylaw for the purposes of providing greater clarity of procedural rules and increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of meetings, recognizing that rules should be written in plain language to help facilitate, not hinder, the business of council. The review of the procedural bylaw was based on best practice research, guiding principles, provincial legislation, and feedback from all members of council. We're prepared to answer any questions of the committee based on the report in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Clerk, I believe this is what we normally, in colloquial terms, refer to as Bylaw 1, and it regulates the behavior of council as you can see in the details of the bylaw. So maybe we could have just the timeline before we go any further, just for context. There was a deferral at council to this committee, and that is how this became part of the committee. So was there any direction in the deferral from council that the committee needs to follow?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the direction of the deferral and referral, the committee dealt with a motion from Councillor Hutchison, and it dealt with the electronic meetings as well as the notice provisions. Okay, and I see from the report that there is some suggested changes to those aspects. So, so we all know that we're doing an electronic meeting right now. This is a Zoom meeting. The procedural reality of this Zoom meeting was that it was made possible by the pandemic emergency, correct? Mr. Chair, you're correct.
So is it fair to say that the amendments that are being suggested here that deal with electronic meetings are an attempt to consider whether council wishes to have electronic meetings after the pandemic and emergency is declared finished? Is that correct?
True, Mr. Chair. You're fair to say that in part, changes to the procedural bylaw were based on changes at the provincial level with respect to the pandemic. The first change occurred on March 24th, 2020, and that was pursuant to the Municipal Emergency Act, which amended the Municipal Act to permit electronic meetings during a declared state of emergency. Prior to that act, municipalities were permitted to include electronic participation as a component of the procedure, but members participating electronically were not counted towards quorum, nor were they permitted to vote. So on July 21st, 2020, the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act was enacted, which further amended the Municipal Act to permit the electronic meetings outside of the declared state of emergency. So the proposed bylaw incorporates these new procedures and allows for the meetings to continue in an electronic fashion.
Okay, so the fact that this came from a provincial act, is there any discretion on the part of council whether or not to enact the changes? Could we, for example, through amendment, choose to revert to the way things were before the pandemic?
Through you, Mr. Chair, during the pandemic, the rules that we currently have in place stay in place. Once the pandemic is over, the idea is we would go back to in-person meetings, subject to anything else that the province might bring forward. What this report provides is options to have meetings both in person as well as through virtual, based on circumstances and based on what council decides they want to do going forward. Okay, will probably be some more questions from members of the committee as we digest these responses.
Would anyone else like this? So this is just questions to staff about the report before we get to the recommendation. For clarity, these are questions for clarity, as I've been doing. Does anyone else have any questions for clarity to staff about the report? Councillor Pender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Clerk, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about motions to defer. If I read the report correctly, it talks about an amendment that would see deferral go from committee to council if the committee defers a report. Can you just clarify that for me and maybe explain that process a bit more?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Similar to a comment that was made by Councillor Stroud about a zombie item, this would eliminate that from occurring, whether it was a short-term rental or the listed closed meeting procedures, which seem to be circling the drain at this time. It would allow for the recommendation to go up to council to have council make a decision. The reality is that committee cannot direct staff to do any substantive work on things. It's council that provides that direction. So it makes sense for the deferral motion to move up to council and have council make that decision.
I actually understand that rationale and don't disagree with it. My only concern is if that were to happen regularly, would it strip committees of their importance and power if a deferral is in order and then council just does what it wants anyway? Like, I know that council ultimately has to approve everything that committees do, as you just said. There's no disagreement here. I'm just thinking that could a motion to defer then become a tool at committee for committees to not do their work, essentially?
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, I would disagree with that comment. I think what it does, it provides context to ensure that the committee is doing their work within a timely fashion.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to see how it goes, but I just wanted to raise that as a potential. Thanks.
Any other members of the committee have questions for clarity about the report? Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question leads on to what Councillor Carley had just mentioned. I am actually not opposed to having a zombie motion that took 2.5 years to get through a committee, if in fact what it does is force a decision to work collaboratively with the community. So I'm not entirely comfortable with having a deferral automatically go, because as what happens is you have a smaller pool of councillors at a meeting that can effectively game, so to speak. I'm only using that word pejoratively in the sense I'm trying to put it out there. And it could be actually a very good strategic play to fill a committee with a certain perspective to bounce things around quickly. I think it's more appropriate to have a working committee that works out the bugs and things. If it takes a little longer, fine. Additional meetings can be held. All of that can happen. So I'm very cautious of that. So I have a second question, but maybe you can just address that one first, Mr. Clerk.
Through Mr. Chair, it is clear that council and committee both have duties that they're responsible for. So motions for deferral that would seem to sit around without any action, I don't believe bodes well on the actions of committee and council on a go-forward basis. Deferrals can always be qualified by the idea of having a deferral and a report back by a certain date. And you notice that we had that happen at the last council meeting. So that doesn't mean that the straight deferrals will happen all the time, but committee and council do have work that they have to do that the community is banking on.
Okay. So it's a matter of debating perspective, and I can appreciate that. The other items, there was interesting correspondence that came in regarding responsibilities of councillors, and I was wondering if the clerk had a chance to read any of that correspondence and have any comments on it. Particularly, what twigged me was the idea that this particular change in the bylaws may be too restrictive on the ability of councillors to reflect the views of their concerns of their constituents, and this really struck a chord with me because, at times I have been vocal, and at times my constituents have implored me and given me great reason to be boisterous or have a contrarian perspective. And I'm very concerned that if this is going to restrict my ability to speak, that I'm not sure I could support this in its current content.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, we did have an opportunity to review the correspondence that was contained in the addendum. And what I would say to you is, with respect, obviously, to the comment that the bylaw should be reworded to permit a reasonable high threshold of speaking off topic before the mayor and the chair may interrupt the member, it's our view that this is not feasible to establish an objective threshold like this. The central purpose of the bylaw is to ensure that meetings are conducted in an effective and efficient model. So in order to achieve this purpose, it's critical that members speak only to the subject matter under debate, and that the mayor does have that discretion to interject as required. So we do not agree with the comment contained therein.
Mr. Chair, I may have an additional question. Would I be given a privilege to come back later if we had another opportunity?
Absolutely. Yes. As long as everyone's had a chance at the first round of questions, I actually might have a couple more myself, but I want to give everyone here and the visiting councillor a chance to speak, and then perhaps we can have a second round. We'll do it that way. Councillor Ostroff, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the answer. I thought it was a great question because it's what I noted as well as Councillor Chappell. But I think our clerk comments was that we would have a greater ability to express ourselves. Did I hear that we are not as restricted as we were thought we might be? Is that Councillor Chappell, were you satisfied with that answer? Can I ask that, Mr. Chair? I just want to know what the answer was. Are we as councillors within this restricted further, or what was the answer?
Okay. Yes, and so keeping in mind before you answer, Mr. Burke, that there's the bylaw amendments that are in front of us, and then there's the comments from the member of the public who's a former councillor himself, so he knows what he's talking about. And when he speaks of former mayor, it's just because he was a councillor himself. He was sitting in ward council. But Mr. Clerk, please, if you could just clarify what you had earlier said to Councillor Chappell.
Mr. Chair, to the councillors, the bylaw is not more restrictive with respect to how members of council can participate at meetings. So that's not in play at this time.
Thank you. I just need to hear that.
Seeing no hands, we'll go to a second round. Councillor Chappell, you can go first. These are questions of clarification of the report.
With respect, Mr. Chair, I'm not completely comfortable at this time to vote on this. I was really quite focused on the short-term rental, and I would move for deferral to the next meeting.
Okay, hang on, Councillor. Don't jump ahead. We're not at deliberations. We're at questions for clarification. Yes, once this is on the floor, deferrals, amendments, so on, they're all in order as usual with the committee bylaw. So, just questions of clarification about what the bylaw means, what the proposed amendments mean, and how this affects us. Councillor Kylie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'll ask a question that I asked the clerk on email when we first saw this, which was about why the new bylaw proposes to only alert the mayor and CAO to relevant motions that are passed by other municipalities. Why wouldn't all of council be given that information?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. The City of Kingston receives many resolutions from other municipalities that are not relevant to Kingston. For example, we received a resolution recently with respect to the nuclear reactor technology. And while some resolutions from other municipalities are relevant to Kingston. Many may more be appropriately referred to and reviewed in action through a standing committee.
So can you expand on the comments about a standing committee, please?
Could you repeat your question, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk, your comments about the standing committee, could you just expand on what you mean by that, please?
Through you to the councillor, yes. Resolutions come through the corporation here on a number of different matters. A number of them are related to actions and responsibilities that are under the jurisdiction of the various standing committees. And when I say standing committees, I'm talking about our 4 standing committees. So it's more appropriate in my mind that that information is forwarded to those committees which have the jurisdiction really to deal with those as working committees, as policy committees. And so that's why our suggestion is that it follows that particular pattern.
Thank you for that. And one more, Mr. Chair, through you. Does that then, I'm just trying to understand the order of command in which this filtering happens, because I, again, appreciate the need to discern what is worth council's consideration. And I have trust in commissioners and staff and the mayor to do that. But I am also very interested in the democratic integrity of council as a body, and also being able to see as much as we can, and what may or may not be relevant could be a matter of interpretation. So in the bylaw, I think it talks about it potentially going through the commissioner. Is that how such communication would end up at a standing committee, is through the commissioner, the relevant commissioner?
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, yes. What would happen is the information that would come through would be placed on a common drive, so all of council will be able to see the communication that comes through. We would go through the commissioner's office to ensure where is the proper avenue for it to make its way.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So I have a question, Mr. Clerk, regarding the Provinces Act that you mentioned before and the electronic meeting. So should this pass council? Well, first of all, my question is a simple high-level one. In the proposed changes here, there are some that originate with the new provincial legislation, and there are others that originate through a review of the procedural bylaw by your office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So to the proposed changes surrounding electronic meetings, once the emergency has been declared finished, are those proposed changes all coming from the Municipal Act?
Once through you, Mr. Chair, to yourself, the changes in our procedural bylaw would allow for flexibility and nimbleness to be able to have meetings either by way of virtual or in person once it is safe to do so. So everything really is predicated on the ending of the state of emergency, which we're currently under.
I understand that, but the question is, are these changes to the procedural bylaw, which will remain permanent after the emergency is over, are these proposed changes both coming from the provincial act, the new provincial act, and from staff's review, or from one or the other? What is like the proposed changes to electronic meetings? I want to know if they're solely coming from the provincial act, or is it also from staff's review?
Through Mr. Chair, the provincial legislation provides for that which you are reading in your report. So the answer shortly is yes, it's through the province.
The province has made this option available, and staff is recommending that we take it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you are correct.
Okay. So my question would then be, who is it that decides when a meeting may be virtual once the emergency is over, according to these proposed changes?
At this point, Mr. Chair, the option could go either virtual or it would go through in person and would be predicated on council's wish as well as the safety of the members of council staff in the community. So once the pandemic is over, if this amendment is not approved, you would revert back to in-person meetings. What you have in the bylaw allows for the option of having in-person meetings as well as virtual meetings, which as you've seen in the past, virtual meetings allow for meetings to happen, whether it's through an emergency, an ice storm, or just a matter of timing and having to have a meeting and having to get members of council back to City Hall in order to have a meeting which might last, and we've seen in the past, 30 seconds. So this allows for that option of being able to have that particular meeting done virtually.
Okay, so I understand that, but the question is, who is it that decides that the meeting will be virtual if that is, like, who is it that has the ability to decide that with the proposed changes?
With the proposed changes, it would be something that would be coordinated through council, as we did with a poll about 6 months ago, to come up with what we believe is the proper way to have our meetings on a go forward basis. Obviously, the mayor does have the opportunity to call special meetings in addition to what we see in the council calendar. But at the point that we're talking about right now, it allows for that opportunity to be either virtual or in person.
Okay. I need to be clear we delineate my questions because I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. The pandemic is the pandemic. We're under a state of emergency. We're having our meetings virtually directly because of that reality. But that is not the purpose of my questions. The purpose of my questions is the ramifications of the permanent change to bylaw 1. And specifically, because, okay, as a point of reference, right now, ignoring the emergency, but until March of 2020, the situation was every time we wanted to meet in Memorial Hall or in Goods Hall or anywhere else at RMC or anywhere else in the city, St. Lawrence College, Queens, whenever we wanted a guest venue, like an away game kind of, it was a resolution of council. And it was done at the previous council meeting in a live meeting because that was the only way we had to meet. So my question is, outside of a situation of emergency and barring any emergency that may come up, under what circumstances and under whose authority might we have a virtual meeting with the proposed changes?
Here, Mr. Chairman, to be clear, council makes that decision.
Council would make the decision.
That's the answer we're looking for.
Yeah, so that's the same as it was before. So when we wanted to meet in Goods Hall, we had to have a resolution to council the meeting before that our next meeting will be at Goods Hall. And actually that usually was during the last item of the council agenda. Is that the way it would happen with this procedural bylaw change?
Here, Mr. Chairman, short answer is yes.
Okay. So the only time is it true that the only time we would have a surprise virtual meeting would be as if the mayor deemed it an emergency?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I don't think we have surprise virtual meetings. We provide the proper notice, but ultimately your statement is quite correct. Thank you.
Okay, so we could have a virtual meeting for the reason that you stated. Like, for example, one vote is needed, one vote of council is needed. There's little debate involved, but we have to meet to have a legal vote on the matter. That could be done virtually with these changes, where it could not be done before without having already decided that at our previous meeting. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, you're correct.
So the ability to call that virtual meeting for that expedient reason, that's actually the rationale for that is one of efficiency and not one of emergency. So is that reflected in the language in the procedural bylaw?
Yes.
Okay. Could it be, so this is the whole point of my line of questioning. Could this theoretically be used to have a virtual meeting of council, which is not voted on, the existence of which is not voted on by council?
I wouldn't agree with that statement. The mayor is able to call special meetings of council, whether it becomes in a virtual format or an in-person meeting. There is some discretion that's in play there depending on various circumstances.
Well, the mayor can call a special meeting, but he can't currently, outside of an emergency, call a virtual special meeting. He can only call an in-person special meeting.
Well, if we follow that, we would have to call a meeting, bring people in so that we could pass a resolution, so then we could have a virtual meeting that night, hypothetically. If we're talking
Correct.
that doesn't seem to be as efficient and effective of using the virtual meeting platform. The idea of virtual meetings is the idea of being able to host meetings depending upon a certain limited number of actions. Like you said, it could be efficiencies, it could be emergencies, it could be a whole range of things. But our main way of doing business is here at the heart of City Hall, and those are through in-person meetings. And I've said this before, but just to make it even clearer, the amended procedural bylaw provides for flexibility to be able to host meetings virtually if the opportunity calls for it.
Not necessarily at a resolution of council.
As I said, to bring 13 people in to City Hall to have a meeting, to pass a resolution so that we can have a virtual meeting that night doesn't quite seem to be effective and efficient use of both council, staff, and the community's time.
So it's all very logical. What you're saying is all very logical, but I want to make sure the committee understands what's being proposed. So what is being proposed is the ability for the mayor and possibly staff to call a virtual meeting outside a state of emergency for any reason. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't say for any reason per se. Obviously, it's going to be contextualized based on a factor that would require or dictate that we should have a virtual meeting. Having virtual meetings is not at the risk of not having in-person meetings. What it is an option.
Right, an option that has an unknown number of times it could be used. So, okay, well, that's all my questions for clarity. When it comes to the floor, I'll have some comments. Who else would like to ask questions for clarity? Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just was hoping on some clarity as well on this. I think it's a great tool. I've also heard from some members of the public who have said that this is an opportunity for them to engage through this pandemic that they haven't had before because they have young children or an inability to actually attend council. And on top of that, my next question, because I had this problem as well, would be, is part of the consideration of this the fact that we may have a very light agenda for, let's say, a committee or council, for instance, and we're basically, we can either not hold the meeting or defer a bunch of stuff on a committee to the next one, which then begets kind of larger and larger committee ones where it becomes worth holding the meeting. And then, or the option is, if we have everybody come in, I've been to meetings where everybody's showing up, increased their carbon footprint, got there to basically go through one or two things after 30 seconds and then walk away and leave. So it's like we held a meeting for the sake of holding a meeting. Whereas in this case, if we were to do it virtually, we could avoid everybody, like driving to it or getting to it and basically still be able to get through the agenda items, but do it in a kind of efficient and hopefully more environmentally friendly way. when it's relevant and when it's kind of a good tool in the box. We see this as just offering another tool in the box. Is that kind of accurate?
Through Mr. Chair, the councillor, yes, that is totally accurate.
Perfect. Thank you.
I allowed you to go on Councillor Bowman, because it's really not that important. But you basically just stated your opinions and then asked a question. And people do that all the time, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But I really like people to use this opportunity to ask questions of clarity, because we will be moving the recommendation and we will move to deliberations at that time where you can state all your opinions. Councillor Chappelle, is this a question of clarity? Okay, if you start on
Yes,
an opinion, I
yes,
will
Mr. Chair.
remind you about the question.
My question is for the clerk. The process to call the meeting, I think, is what causing some consternation to cause a virtual meeting. Is there a process by which we can add into this bylaw that in order to call a virtual meeting, you would have to notify members of council for an email straw vote to see if they're willing to participate in a virtual meeting to begin with? Because my concern is if it's a very, very hot topic, so to speak, where a lot of people wish to speak to the issue, a great way to circumvent public discourse is by having a virtual meeting versus an in-person meeting. And that would be my greatest fear of having it proposed in the manner it is. So I'm just wondering, is there a mechanism to ensure there's checks and balances? Has that been considered in this particular aspect?
Through Mr. Chair, to the councillor, there are checks and balances, and there ultimately council decides the type of meeting they're going to have. We have a meeting calendar approved by council, so we know when those meetings are going to happen. And if we are going to move to a virtual reality after the pandemic is undeclared, obviously we would work with council as we would reintroduce these type of meetings. So the answer is yes, we would work with council with respect to that.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Clerk, if I may. So the act allows then for a vote of council on the existence of a virtual meeting to be done electronically through email and text?
Through Mr. Chair, no, the act is silent with respect to that process. That is a process that is undertaken by the municipality on a go-forward basis.
So as a courtesy, the clerks would be saying they would consult members of the committee or of council before switching to a virtual meeting to ensure perhaps that they could reach quorum and things like that.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, we would always consult with council.
Any other questions of clarity? Okay, so let me get this back up here. Sorry, it's in the other addendum. One sec. So we've been asked by council to review and make recommendations, particularly but not exclusively regarding the provisions regarding electronic meetings and the provision determining of the location of council meetings, it being understood that the AP committee report back to council no later than the second meeting in February 2021. So we need, as per the council resolution, we need to give them a recommendation no later than, I guess that would be the fourth meeting in the new year. We only have one more meeting before then. It would be the February meeting 2 months hence, unless we call a special meeting, of course. So our question in front of us tonight is: Are we ready to pass the recommendation as is? Do we wish to make further recommendations? Do we wish to amend the recommendation by addition or deletion or subtraction or whatever? Or do we wish to defer to the next meeting to finish the item then, to perhaps consult with constituents, that kind of thing? These are all in order as possibilities. And before we get to those possibilities, we need it moved and seconded to get it on the floor. Is that why your hand is up?
Sorry,
You want to speak?
sorry, Mr. Chair, we should see if there's any members of the public who are interested in speaking to this matter before we deliberate on it.
Correct. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak, ask questions, make comments on this item?
Mr. Chair, there's one member who called in by phone who I suspect wishes to speak, so I'm just going to turn their phone on and see. Just bear with me.
Yeah.
If the individual on the phone wishes to speak, can they please hit star on their phone and then the number 6, that's *6, to unmute themselves? All right, Mr. Chair, it does not appear that anyone wishes to speak, so we'll return to you.
Okay, one sec. Just so that we're not having a technical difficulty, just give me 1 sec. I'm going to check something. So that number corresponds to the publicly available number for Mr. Don B. Rogers, who is the one that sent us that letter. I believe he probably wishes to speak, but he may not have the technical ability. Can we take a short recess in which time we'll attempt to reach Mr. Rogers so that he can participate in the meeting? I'm going to call a 2-minute recess and we'll attempt to do that. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Hi, Mr. Rogers, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, just hang on. We'll
Okay.
find the chair and we'll proceed.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Strader, are you present?
Yes, I'm here. Don Rogers here.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for Councillor Stroud.
I'm standing by.
Sorry about that, folks. There was a lineup for my bathroom.
Okay.
So did we ever reach Mr. Rogers on the phone there?
Yes, right here.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, committee, relax. I'm not going to go through the whole submission that I left with you. Just wanted to say that the whole purpose of my submission is to stimulate discussion on some important issues, and the renewing of Bylaw 1 is a good opportunity to have a discussion. I would like to clarify one thing earlier in the meeting when the city clerk was quite right that there's no further restrictions proposed on councillors with the new bylaw than the old bylaw. But the gist of my submission is that the old bylaw was too restrictive and therefore the new bylaw should be less restrictive, not the same as the previous bylaw. So just to clarify that point. Obviously, I think when we discuss this, we are looking to strike a balance between civility and freedom of speech, and I hope that this stimulates some discussions on that. For example, I think some councillors have run afoul on the old bylaw. I think Councillor Hill had some problems. People were complaining about some of his things that he said. I think Councillor Neal has had some complaints and points there, all hinging on this respectability. And I think it's important to define, what is respect or respectfully. So in any event, and another further example, by the way, I might say right now, I think Councillor Chappelle was wearing a god-awful jacket earlier this evening. I wouldn't be seen dead in a jacket like that. Now, is that disrespectful or not? I leave that to the committee to decide. Anyhow, this is the shortest speech I've ever made, Mr. Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Your wisdom is appreciated, and I understand your point. Your point is that when you review Bylaw 1, it's an opportunity to have a more in-depth discussion about the rules that council operates under.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so staff has the ability to respond to the submission from the public. So Mr. Rogers, you please stay on the line and listen, but we'll have to mute you. And you won't be able to speak any further, but the staff will respond to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The proposed bylaw does not substantively alter the rules of order and decorum that's contained in the existing procedural bylaw. The rules are not intended to stifle free speech or meaningful debate, nor do they prohibit general criticism. Rather, these rules are in place to ensure that members of council show respect for one another and for different viewpoints while engaging in civil debate. The rules of order and decorum established in the bylaw are consistent with those comparable procedures and other procedural bylaws in other municipalities. I think I would leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, so that's the public section, and now we go to a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. You got it on the floor. Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Bone. Councillor McLaren, you had your hand up earlier. I believe you wish to speak to the recommendation. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was contacted by Councillor Hutchison with an amendment for this that seems quite reasonable to me, and I believe I shared it with most of you before the meeting. So if you've checked your emails, you'll see it there. And I understand that the staff were very instrumental in actually writing this, and it's also another long one. I believe Councillor Kiley said he would second it. Is that correct? Yes. So if the clerks could put that up. I would like to give the rest of my time to Councillor Hutchison, who I think understands this much better than I do, having actually had several meetings with staff on the issue. Thank you.
I'm presuming.
Do we have the amendment for the screen here?
I'm presuming this is the chair's allowing it, so it's procedurally okay. So my main concern, as I indicated at council briefly, was that in-person meetings have more priority than electronic meetings. And that I had questions like some of the councillors did about how electronic meetings take place. But my main point here is that I thought the language was a little loose about who could, how electronic meetings could come about, and that they shouldn't be able to be supplant in-person meetings. I will say that a point that Councillor Bone brought up, we could do both, right? And in fact, the clerk has even indicated that that's the aim. That's why we have those fancy screens on our at City Hall, if you remember City Hall. So a couple of people have talked to me about why that would be better, and people could phone or tap in through Zoom to watch the meeting. And of course, the council, they can't really ask questions. That's for committees, but they can delegate and that sort of thing. So the purpose of, I'm trying to move this down so I can quickly run through it. I'm just going to, just a second. Oops, that didn't work. Here we go. Okay.
Hang on a sec. Point of order, Councillor Spell.
I've got it up myself. But all I can see is Councillor Stroud.
Yeah, I just the motion. I just wondering. I didn't receive a copy of it via email. I'm just wondering if Councillor McLaren would be able to send it to me so I can read it on a bigger screen, because I can't.
Okay.
I can't read it.
Councillor.
Okay, so we'll just pause deliberations for a minute. Councillor McLaren, can you resend that that item and include Councillor Chappelle, please?
Mr. Chair, I can circulate to Councillor Chappelle.
Okay. Email is forthcoming, Councillor Chappelle. Just hold that thought, Councillor Hutchison. We'll just wait until Councillor Chappelle can follow along.
Absolutely.
And just to remind everyone procedurally, we have an amendment by Councillor McLaren being spoken to by the visiting councillor, Councillor Hutchison. See you, Councillor Ostroff. We will we'll wait for a sign from Councillor Chappelle that he has the motion, and then we'll allow Councillor Hutchison to finish his introduction, and then we'll go to members of the committee. Do you have it, Councillor Chappelle? No. While we're waiting, he's got it now. So this is an amendment regarding only the wording around electronic meetings. Go ahead, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you scroll to the bottom, I invite you to read through it. But the clerk has supplied a summary of the intention from the meeting I had with him and other staff, that we're trying to capture in this amendment. Some of the wording is already in the proposal, and some of it is added. For instance, I was asking for a definition of emergency and pointed out that we already have that in other legislation, municipal legislation. But anyway, I'm just going to read it here. The intent of this amendment is that electronic meetings are permitted only in the following circumstances. A, where the city is in a state of declared emergency. B, the 6-month period following the termination of the declared emergency. And I'll add there that staff were very concerned that they needed that amount of time to, after an emergency has been lifted, to adjust the city operations so that they could work their way out of emergency conditions. And also to make sure that, say, the pandemic is done, right? So those are examples. Or C, where council passes a motion to waive the rules and permit electronic meeting. The intent of section 6.25 is to ensure that the members of the public and staff may participate in any meeting via electronic means, even where council is required to be physically present, which is apropos to my comment to Councillor Bohm. I mean, I think he made a good point that more people would be able to, tap into to council meetings. So if we were electronic in some form, now we're on YouTube and we're on Zoom at the moment, and but if we're in person with all the advantages of being in person, other people could at least follow in some form through electronically. So that's my amendment, and I think it does fulfill that largely. And I realize there might be other concerns, but this particular concern is addressed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. Just to be clear, in the summary at the end of the email, it was, it summarized the gist of the meeting with staff and the reason for the wording of the amendment. But there's two distinct aspects to the amendment. One is when council might meet virtually and under what circumstances. And the second one, completely different, is when members of the public might participate virtually to an in-person meeting of council. It's two completely different points. So I just wanted to make sure that we're aware that it's not all just about council meeting virtually. It's about whether members of the public can participate virtually to an in-person meeting.
I think
so
that's
we go,
important.
Yeah, so we go back to Councillor McLaren, who has the floor. He's proposed an amendment. Councillor McLaren, would you wish to speak to the amendment?
So I just think that this is eminently reasonable. There's only upside, there doesn't seem to be downside, so I can't see any reason that I would oppose this. I think it's good. Thank you.
Okay. Who else wishes to speak to the amendment? Councillor Chappell. Or actually, I think Councillor Bohm had his hand up earlier. Councillor Chappell. I'm going to recognize Councillor Bohm first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this properly, because I mean, I don't know, I've heard from a lot of people that say that there's really been benefit to engagement that possibly wouldn't happen before with the electronic format. So I want to ensure that what we're doing actually allows for the greatest number of people to engage. I think if you look historically, some people would attend the meetings, there's no doubt about that, but a greater part of the population, we weren't providing childcare for people with young families or anything like that. So they weren't really able to not necessarily follow along. It's one thing to put it on YouTube and watch it, but to truly engage. And I think that that's maybe one of the elements here that we may be restricting if we don't have some type of hybrid format. So, I mean, for instance, you know, like even some type of modified format after the pandemic, I think that virtual meetings and electronic format are a tool that we should be able to pull out of the box when it suits us and when we decide upon it as council, as a different way of engaging different members of the public, right? So I mean, if it was, let's say for instance, every other meeting, one's virtual, one's in person, we then engage different facets of the public. Some people would love to come to in-person meetings. We have to also consider the fact that the world has changed and a lot of people are maybe not going to want to be in person going forward. We also don't really know what's around the bend. So I think keeping this as a tool and not necessarily just a restricted tool to only during emergency orders is something that I would really kind of cherish, and almost, I think it's something that we'd be a little bit foolish to sort of sideline, also based on the fact that the vast majority of the world has now had to almost work electronically for a good chunk of time. So to be honest, the world's moving this way. So with the amendments as proposed, I'm wondering if the clerk could possibly answer this, because I believe he was involved in this. Would we not be restricting the use of electronic meetings to only emergencies or during an emergency order? Is that, if I'm understanding it correctly, and that's my concern.
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, it's actually quite the opposite. What we're allowing for with this amendment is both members of the public and staff participating via electronic means or in person. So we're providing the best of the options, which is either or and both at the same time.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, and I must have misread that, or only been kind of considering it in isolation. So that addresses my concern there. So then, if that's the case and that this amendment allows for that, then yes, I think that's a great idea, and it definitely ties it up. My only concern was that if we were limiting ourselves here, but from according to your answer, then yeah, I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bohm. Now it's Councillor Chappell.
To
the amendment.
It is to the amendment. I appreciate the reminder. My question is, this type of motion, would it allow me to actually then physically be at a place like behind me on the beach somewhere outside of Kingston to participate in council meetings and have a vote?
When the meeting is in virtual, yes, you could be in the Bahamas or wherever you are right now. But I mean, what we're trying to do once the pandemic is over is try to go back to a new norm. And the new norm still is meeting at City Hall, given the safety necessities that are in place. So while we're virtual, you can meet us from anywhere in the world.
So to clarify then, when we go back to normal and meeting in person, I would not be permitted to have my call from the beaches?
Through you to the council, no, not at this time.
Councillor Chappelle, you have the floor.
That was all. I was just trying to get clarification.
Thank you. So you had me there for a minute. I thought you might be in the Bahamas, but your hair is not moving at the same speed as that palm tree. So I know you're not outside, but it is a nice feeling that, you know, one day we'll get back to the islands. You know, one day. So I guess what we've heard is that the amendment clarifies the use of electronic meetings, adds the possibility of hybrid participation, and specifies when electronic meetings can be used. I guess my question just for staff is staff comfortable with the amendment's wording? I know that you were involved in the crafting of the wording. If passed, is staff happy to work with this amendment?
Mr. Chair, yes, we are very comfortable with the amended wording.
Okay. So on the amendment, who has not spoken? Hang on, Councillor Bohm, you've already spoken to the amendment. So I guess there's the 6 of us would vote on the amendment unless anyone else wishes to speak. Okay, so Mr. Clerk, did we have a seconder for the amendment? Yeah. Councillor Kelly? Okay. So we'll call the question. Oh, point of order from Councillor Bohm. Point of order.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, would voting on this preclude us from ever having hybrid meetings at some point in the future where somebody could call in and others could be in person?
So, Mr. Chair, if I understand the question correctly, and I don't want to really rely on the word hybrid. So the intent of this amendment is that members of the public and staff may participate in any meeting via electronic means. Council itself would be physically present. 6 months after the pandemic, council may choose to change that. But at this point in time, it's premature to go down that road.
And sorry, Mr. Clerk, also council could move to have a virtual meeting, but it would be, this amendment asks it to be by council resolution as an exception to the emergency.
Mr. Chair, you're correct.
Thank you.
And so to further clarify the councillor's question, the ability for one councillor to participate virtually and another one is not something that is made possible by this amendment.
Mr. Chair, there is no access at this point with this motion for any members of council to appear virtual as a physical meeting at this point.
So it's the meeting itself is either physical or virtual, depending on what council has said.
Correct.
But the clause to electronic participation, which is separate, allows for staff and members of the public to participate in a council meeting that's in person by electronic means.
Correct.
Is that clear? What we're voting on? It's all very clear. Councillor Osterhoff.
Sorry about that. I shouldn't touch it. I won't touch it again, James. I'm terrible. The one question I had, I thought I had understood it. I'm sorry, Mr. Clerk, did you, because one of the things that I thought we would be able to do is, let's say in a post-COVID era, if one of us is not well, it would be wise to stay home. Are you saying an in-person meeting cannot be, so if I have a cough, I can't stay home and participate it electronically? Public can, staff can, but not counselors.
Mr. Chair, the counselor is correct.
Is that possible to change that, or is there a security reason for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is a safety reason, and it's also a practical reason with respect to recorded voting and other things that might be related with that. This motion or this amendment here talks about the fact of keeping this in place for 6 months. During the 6 months, we're going to be evaluating different opportunities so that if at that time it's something that we want to deal with, we will be in a position to deal with that. But at the present time with the pandemic, we're not prepared to go down that road at this point.
Thank you. I would just suggest, Councillor Ostroff, that what your suggestion is in order, but it's not in order during the discussion of this amendment. It's in order when we're discussing the recommendation as a whole.
I'm sorry.
It would be through a separate amendment that would allow for virtual participation by council members, which is not suggested by this amendment. So procedurally, we have to deal with this amendment first. And then if we're not comfortable with the final result, obviously we have the opportunity to further amend. This amendment, of course, has benefited from full treatment by staff, with the crafting of the wording. So, and staff has indicated that they're comfortable with the wording. So that's the context of this amendment. Does anyone else wish to speak before I call the question? I haven't spoken to this amendment, and I'm not going to, but I will speak to the main motion at some point and give up the chair. So I call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that passes 4-2. That's the amendment. So now to the motion as amended. So this is the amendment of the procedural bylaw in general. We've got the electronic section that was dealt with by that amendment. We've got the entirety of the exhibit in front of us. So I'll just read a few highlights just so we're clear about what it is we're voting on. So bylaw 1 from 2010, amended 11 times in its current form, still needs some tweaking, some housekeeping stuff. There's a lot of duplication redundancy, which is dealt with by the proposed changes. So housekeeping type changes. Then there's the wording about the new act that the clerk spoke to at the beginning, from the beginning of the Municipal Emergency Act, that allows for electronic meetings and other things. That language is incorporated in the new wording. There's section on post-section confidentiality. So there's further wording, sort of tweaking on housekeeping petitions, communications, other municipalities, resolutions. We heard about that with a question. Motion to defer, we heard about that from Councillor Kiley, the clarification there. Motion to reconsider, the wording is tweaked there. And then there's the last clause has to do with the exhibit, has to do with the timing of the changes. And there's a section of definitions. And to the point of the correspondence, there's a section on conduct of members, which is not new. It is the exhibit that will the wording in the exhibit would be the new procedural bylaw, and it spells out the conduct of council members. You're familiar with those rules because they're the existing rules. There is an exception. Subsection 3.4 does not preclude a member from expressing opinions on any policy related to the government of Canada and the province of Ontario. Therefore, it would be permitted to comment about other levels of government. There is a procedure about how to deal with supposed breaches. There is wording about questioning the integrity of staff, and wording about absences. And there's wording about recording equipment. It goes on. Role of the mayor, the deputy mayor, city clerk. This is all subsections that were in the original bylaw. So we will go to comments from questions from members of the committee. I guess it's questions only for clarification on the bylaw. Before we go to deliberations, maybe we could have a chance to clarify sections of the bylaw. So if that's the purpose, you'll be allowed to speak. If you're giving an opinion about saying, you'll have to wait till we go to deliberation. Mr. Schreiber, do you have a question? No. Okay. So the questions about the bylaw itself, the proposed new procedural bylaw, are in order. Councillor Kylie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A few times we've mentioned an emergency ending and then reviewing practices within 6 months or something to that effect. Can the clerk clarify if that's actually spelled out in the bylaw? Because truth be told, I read the report, but I haven't gone line by line through the bylaws.
Through you to the councillor, based on the amendment that was presented by Councillor McLaren, that is now in the proposed bylaw going forward.
Perfect. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was explicit. Thanks. That's all.
Just remind members, there's also a section about circumstances of closed meetings. There's a section about confidential material, investigators, delegations, the rules around delegations, the rules around briefings, the rules around petitions, heard motions, of the types of motions, reports, the various types of reports, the various types of motions, the minutes, basically all the sections of the city council agenda are spelled out what the rules are for each one. What we don't have, Mr. Clerk, is a change document, like one which tells us which things are proposed changes. The only way to know that would be to hold the original bylaw one on, print it out and have it on one hand and have the new bylaw on the other hand and compare the two. And we haven't had that opportunity to do. I just feel a little bit pressured. I don't know if the rest of the committee feels this way. I feel a little pressured to make a decision on this, something this dense, without the opportunity to do our due diligence, seeing as it was on the addendum. There's not a lot of commentary right now. I think, am I correct that a lot of members are hoping to maybe digest the material a little bit more? We have been going 3.5 hours. I don't want to lead the witness or anything, but does anyone wish to maybe continue this at our next meeting in February so that we have a chance to, there is some. Before I take that motion, I see the clerk would wish to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Chair, to your comment about a red line bylaw, we could provide the members of the committee with that bylaw prior to this being considered at an upcoming meeting. So we could provide you a redlined copy sometime early next week. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, that would be really helpful, Mr. Clerk. It's more just to the point of our role, our governance role of due diligence before because as Councilor Hutchison said, these are the rules that council will abide by even after we're gone. We're only here for 2 more years unless we get reelected, and these rules will be in place for years, just as bylaw 1 from 2010. So perhaps that change document would be an excellent thing. Councilor Bohm, did you want to move an amendment, or did you want to speak? Go ahead, Councilor. Go ahead, Councilor Bohm.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, and through you, I was just agreeing with the fact that there's a lot to digest, and if there's more information that can be forthcoming, I was just going to propose maybe deferring it, but also just doing a special meeting about it, maybe in January if that's feasible with everybody's schedule, just because I think it's an important enough item that it can almost stand on its own for a meeting. Just throwing it out there.
Oh, the new dad suggesting an extra meeting. That's really dedicated.
I've not run that by my wife yet.
Well, the only thing is we do have this came up before at EITP. We have back-to-back council meetings in January because we have a late start. Yeah. It's the 12th and 19th Tuesdays are 2 weeks in a row. We have council meeting. There's the planning meetings, of course.
February works.
There's a special meeting of the ITP already, and we could only find there was only one date available. So we could do it.
I don't sleep anymore. So whenever you guys want.
Anyway, we're kind of jumping the gun. Nobody's moved deferral, but does anyone? When we do, we can talk about timing. If we do, Councillor Osterhoff, go ahead.
I would move deferral.
Motion to defer. So you're allowed to specify time, place, and direction.
1 month.
Okay, so that would be January 2021. The place would be, I guess, administrative policies virtually. And direction, did you want to specify direction? Councillor Bohm, did you want to, or Councillor Osterhoff? We've already heard the clerk is going to give us a change document, headline document.
Yeah, for those intentions to give us time to review it and to clarify some things.
Thank you. So there's a motion to defer to January 2021, which would require a special meeting. So now the debate is to time, place, or direction. Councillor Spell, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
I'm just simply going to second the motion and call the vote.
Okay. Well, we will call the vote as long as.
Chair, what if we made it for the next February meeting? Sorry, why wouldn't we put it into February instead of an additional meeting?
Right. So, well, that's the debate. Does anyone wish to make a special meeting for January? Councillor Spell?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You think an extra meeting is a good idea? Okay.
It's an important topic. I would definitely entertain it if we could find something that meets everyone's schedule. Certainly.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, did you have any comments about timing?
I think January is going to be really tough for the committee to schedule a meeting. I know because I was part of the EITP exercise, so February is probably the right time. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, we could try, but I'm looking at my January right now, and I see one day. I see one day in the entire month of January that I can meet. So unless that matches everybody else, I wouldn't be available. I have meetings on every day I'm not working except January 20th. Councillor Bohm?
Just an idea, what precludes us from calling a special meeting in February in addition to the regular meeting?
So the regular meeting in February is on the 11th, the second Thursday. I'm available Monday the 1st And that's actually my only other day. So it's, for me, the only days I'm available are January the 20th and February the 1st. And I'm willing on those 2 dates. Is anyone else? We need to find quorum. So if we can find quorum before February 11th, we're in business. Does anyone have any comments about that?
January 20th does work.
That's the day after the second council meeting in January. Councillor Kylie?
This is purely selfish, but if we could do February, I'd be very appreciative of that. I just got a new course that I'm teaching next semester, which I haven't taught before, so I'll have a lot of prep. Again, purely selfish, but if we could push it into February, I'd be happy with that.
Councillor Bowman?
Do we know, do we have any idea, or maybe the clerk can answer this, is the February meeting going to be agenda heavy? Because I mean, maybe it's a pretty simple agenda and we don't, and it kind of could be a special meeting for it in a sense.
Yep.
And maybe we're debating something we don't need to here, is what I'm thinking.
Okay, so that would be a question to the clerk, yeah.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Why don't we just leave it with a deferral? We'll try to find some optional dates in January and February, poll the committee, and then confirm it at that time. January 20th was another date that we had identified as a possibility that might work for everybody. So if we are going to go forward with the deferral, we will find a date, poll the committee, and to pick the date that works best for all. If that's the opportunity. Like I said, Jan 20, I think we might be able to do for APC, but it may not be doable for the rest of the committee. So rather than trying to pick a date out of the sky, we might be able to help facilitate that in a more structured manner.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. I don't think we're I don't think we have the ability to guarantee quorum on any date in January at this meeting. So the deferral needs to specify, it doesn't have to specify a date, Councillor Osroff, it can just specify at our next meeting. So if that next meeting ends up being scheduled as a special meeting, that's at the chair's discretion. I would only do so if I knew we'd have quorum. And if I'm not able to find quorum, then it'll go to the February 11th meeting.
Very good.
Because if it passes. So seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Any other discussion on time, place, or direction? So on direction, it's not specified, it's understood. The direction is so that committee members can compare the new bylaw with the old bylaw. It does need to be specified in the motion. Okay, I'll call the question on the deferral. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So we go back to the agenda. That was business item E. What? There's no F? That's it. Mr. Committee Clerk, any motions or notices of motion?
If there are neither, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any other business from members of the committee? Seeing none, the correspondence was in the addendum already identified. Our next meeting at this point is February 11th, subject to exception if the chair calls a special meeting. You will receive advance notice of that of at least, well, I'd like it to be at least 2 weeks, but it'll be at least 7 days anyway. As soon as we can determine if such a date is possible. So before we go, Councillor Bowman, which member of the family is this?
So this is our newest, number 5, Raphael. He was born December 5th at 12:38 a.m. in the morning. Mom and baby are doing great, and he was born at KGH. So he'd just like to say hello.
Wow.
11 ounces. So that's number 5, and we're done now.
He looks a lot like you, Councillor Bowman.
I don't know. Does you take that as a compliment? All right. Like his mom, and he's beautiful. So
yeah. Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, congrats, Ryan.
Yeah, only so many good things came out of 2020, and that's one of them. So.
It's a Corona baby.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. Well, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Councillor Ostroff, Councillor Bohm, all those in favor? Motion adjourned carried. We'll see you next time, guys. Have
Thank
a Merry
you.
Christmas.